If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Strange Book of Spells. Third Person's POV. Alex Mont had always been captivated by magic. The idea of bending reality with a few words or hand signs fascinated him. As a kid, any movie or show featuring magic instantly caught his attention. Then came the comic books, which opened an entirely new world for him. He loved them all, especially Marvel. Whether it was Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, or even Doctor Doom, Alex was hooked. Magic wasn't something he ever grew out of, though he wasn't one of those kids at school who pretended to be a wizard. His imagination provided all the space he needed for that. There was no need to embarrass himself in public. Since real magic wasn't exactly in the cards, Alex settled for the next best thing, learning simple magic tricks online. It became a hobby, something he enjoyed practicing in his free time. At 18, Alex moved out of his parents' home, finding a small apartment and a part-time job to support himself while continuing his education. When he got his first paycheck, he felt proud, wanting to reward himself with something special. He wandered into a bookstore, looking for something meaningful, something about magic, no matter how small. As he scanned the rows of fantasy books, his fingers grazed over each spine until he froze. Pfft! Book of Spells. Seriously? He muttered, chuckling to himself. I can't take that seriously. That's too funny. Amused, he picked up the book and started flipping through the pages. The parchment-like paper, detailed with magic circles, hand signs, and flowing cursive writing, caught his attention. Hey, it's like a grimoire, he said, intrigued. This is too weird not to buy. At the register, the cashier glanced at the book, then back at Alex's awkward grin. She shook her head, amused, and scanned the purchase. Alex paid, heading home with a small but satisfying smile. Later that night, he sat on his bed, flipping through the pages again. Samsara recycle. What kind of spell is that? Ugh, why is it in cursive? I hate cursive, it gives me a headache. A reincarnation spell, leads to your next cycle in exchange for your current life force, he read aloud. A smirk formed on his lips. Sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. Setting the book aside, Alex began practicing the hand signs. His eyes darted over the page as his grin widened. All right, let's see if I can do this. He mimicked the intricate gestures slowly at first, twisting his fingers into unfamiliar shapes. Feeling a bit ridiculous but too entertained to stop, he whispered the incantation softly, his voice barely louder than a murmur. Solemn vitae transitus, verdera circulum aeternum. The foreign words felt strange on his tongue, but there was something exhilarating about pretending to be Doctor Strange, even if it was just for fun. His imagination ran wild, picturing glowing glyphs forming around him. He smiled, caught up in the fantasy. Finally, Alex formed the last hand sign, a triangle. He exhaled, completing the incantation, Samsara recycle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum filled the room. Alex blinked, glancing around as the book on his lap began to glow faintly. The symbols on the pages pulsed, as if they were alive. The air felt thick, charged with energy. His heart raced. This couldn't be real. Could it? The glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the walls. His hands, still locked in the final hand sign, began to tingle. Warmth spread through his fingers, growing stronger with every second. Holy crap! He whispered. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the room, even though the windows were shut. Papers flew, curtains rustled, and Alex could feel an invisible pull, something far beyond his understanding. His heart pounded as the magic circle from the page lifted off the paper, hovering in the air, swirling with an ethereal light. This wasn't a game anymore. He felt his body being pushed, and for a moment, he saw himself falling backward. But strangely, he was still sitting upright. His hands were translucent. This is also before he could finish, his astral form was sucked into the glowing book. The room flared with bright light as the pages fluttered violently. Then, everything went still. The book softly floated down, landing on his now empty bed. His physical body was nowhere to be seen. In an alternate reality. The rain poured down in torrents, the only sound cutting through the night as two figures raced through the mud. Panting heavily, their feet squelched with every step. The woman cradled a basket in her arms, shielding it from the storm with her long red cloak. Inside, a baby slept soundly, oblivious to the chaos. She pulled the cloak tighter around the infant, trying to keep him warm. Beside her, the baby's father clutched a medallion shaped like a closed eye, his face etched with determination. He muttered something under his breath, forming quick hand signs. A clone of themselves appeared, sprinting off in the opposite direction. That should buy us a few minutes. Let's go, he said, his voice strained with exhaustion. They pushed forward through the dense forest until the outline of a church appeared in the distance. The couple exchanged a look, sad but resolute. This was it. When they reached the church steps, they noticed 2 other baskets already placed there. The father grimaced. Okay, that's a little strange. Get it? Not the time, honey. Sorry. The mother unwrapped her cloak, swaddling it around the baby. Are you sure? The father asked, his voice barely a whisper. I want him to remember me by this, she replied softly. Nodding, he gently placed the medallion atop the sleeping baby's chest. Better in his hands than theirs, he said, his voice thick with emotion. They kissed the baby one last time before stepping back. The father waved his hand, causing a small card to appear atop the medallion. Without another word, they fled into the night, tears streaming down their faces. After a second later, the door to the church opened. Out came the father of the church, looking around in confusion. He looked down and froze when he noticed 3 baskets along his doorsteps. Is this a special event or something? Why is everyone suddenly leaving their babies at the doorstep? Father Orsi muttered in confusion. He picked up the first 2 and set them on the table before returning for the last one. Let's see. This one left a card with a name. That's good. Stephen Strange. A last name. Was he an abandoned noble? Chapter 2, Strangely Pleasantly Plump. Third person's POV. What did he just say? Alex asked himself in shock. I'm sure he picked that name from my chest. He thought, bewildered. Let's backtrack a bit. Why am I so small? The answer should be obvious by now. I'm a freaking baby. The spell, it worked. It actually worked. Alex thought, letting out an involuntary baby giggle, too excited to contain himself. Father Orsi melted at the sound. Well, little Stefan, let's keep the fact that you have a last name to ourselves. We wouldn't want any trouble to befall you. What's he talking about? Alex wondered, his baby mind trying to process the situation. Then, he heard Father Orsi turn to the side. As for the ones left beside you. Suddenly, loud crying erupted from one of the other babies, causing Father Orsi to smile. He sure has some strong lungs for a baby. I'll name you Asta. And for you? I'll name you Yuno. So, I really did reincarnate, but why did I end up as Doctor Strange? Alex, or rather, Stefan thought, trying to piece together what had happened during the spell. During the process, I imagined myself as Doctor Strange. Maybe my thoughts influenced the outcome of the spell. After all, I'm a complete novice. I had no idea what I was truly doing. As Father Orsi tended to the other babies, the reality of his situation began to sink in. I've reincarnated, in a completely unfamiliar place, and I understand a language I shouldn't know. It's not like I'll miss my old life, Stefan thought, though sadness briefly tugged at him. I don't even want to remember it, but I still had friends. Suddenly, tears welled up, his baby body betraying him. Alex, no, Stefan hadn't meant to cry, but the emotions overwhelmed him. Father Orsi quickly comforted him, soothing him with gentle pats. After a few minutes, Stefan calmed down. This should be a serious lesson, one that's repeated in every magical story I've ever seen. Be careful with what you say and read aloud from a book. Stefan exhaled, resigned but determined. I'm not Alex anymore. I should practice and reaffirm that I'm now Stephen Strange, even if it's hard to accept. Repeat the lie enough, and it becomes the truth. Exhausted from the emotional roller coaster, Stefan's tiny eyes grew heavy, and his body finally gave in to sleep. 1 year later. It's been a whole year since I became Stephen Strange. Stefan marveled, still struggling to fully grasp his new reality. Being a baby had nearly driven him mad. With little else to do, he focused on the only thing he could, recalling the spells from the Book of Spells. He couldn't remember all of them, but he committed 5 incantations and their hand signs to memory. One thing he realized was that he had developed a photographic memory, but since he hadn't possessed it before reading the book, many spells had slipped from his mind. Only the ones he reinforced remained. Another year later. At 2 years old, Stefan could now walk and talk alongside Asta and Yuno. During this time, he began asking questions, eager to learn about his surroundings. He discovered that they were in a small village called Hage, where everything revolved around magic. To Stefan, it was like being in paradise, literally a dream come true. His most anticipated moment was turning 15, when he would receive his very own grimoire. But that day still seemed so far away. In the meantime, Stefan practiced magic in secret. For 2 years straight, he would go off by himself, making hand signs and extending his hand, hoping to summon magic. Yet, nothing ever happened. Frustration mounted, but he didn't give up. He concentrated harder, made another hand sign, and this time tiny orange sparks flickered from his fingers. Tears nearly welled in his eyes as he watched the sparks. Eldritch magic! Stefan whispered in a tiny, joyful voice. Age, 3 years old. Now 3, Stefan walked around the village, causing sparks to fly from his hands with increasing ease. At first, producing even the tiniest spark had been a challenge, but after persistent practice, he was improving. It wasn't easy, though. Without a teacher, everything he did was self-taught. Progress was slow, but Stefan felt proud of how far he'd come, even if, for now, he was little more than a human sparkler. As for the cape and amulet he'd worn as a baby, Stefan decided to store them safely away. He didn't feel worthy yet. He wasn't powerful or skilled enough to wield them properly. One day, though, he would be. For now, he will keep practicing. Age 4. Although Stephen spent much of his time trying to learn magic on his own, he didn't forget to live in the moment. The isolation of being reborn as a baby, unable to communicate with anyone, had been too lonely for him. So, despite Asta and Yuno being toddlers, he came to enjoy their company, seeing them as the younger siblings he felt responsible for mentally, at least. Stephen also found Father Orsi amusing and developed a genuine affection for him. Yet, even as he bonded with those around him, he never once stopped training in magic. Age 5. At 5, children began to show their magical aptitude. Yuno displayed great promise with wind magic, while Asta, well, in Stephen's opinion, Asta had fantastic vocal cords. Being a bit older, Stephen was allowed to venture into the forest to train his magic. It was also at this age that he cast his first spell. Stephen spread his arms, palms facing up and down. An orange energy line materialized between them. He rotated his hands in opposite directions, forming a glowing circle around the line. With a swift punch to the center, he conjured a shimmering shield in front of him. Ha ha! Hell yeah, baby! Stephen shouted triumphantly. The shield flickered before vanishing, and his outburst startled a nearby bird, which veered off course and crashed into a tree, falling to the ground with a thud. Stephen winced at the sight. Sorry about that, he muttered, rushing over to check on the bird. The poor creature looked disoriented. It tried to walk it off but ended up limping, lifting one wing while crying out in pain as it struggled to raise the other. That wing might be broken. Once again, I'm really sorry, Stephen said, feeling guilty. The bird shot him a glare. I said I was sorry, he muttered, then sighed. Looks like I have no choice but to put you out of your misery. The bird's eyes widened in shock before it angrily chirped and pecked at Stephen's hand. I was kidding, I was kidding. Stephen quickly reassured, then narrowed his eyes. But, did you understand me? The fat little bird scoffed and tilted its head as if dismissing him. Stephen grinned. I've decided. I'm taking care of you and making you my familiar. Our meeting was fate. He scooped up the bird, carrying it back toward home. The chubby bird gave an exasperated look, clearly realizing it had no choice in the matter. Though you might bankrupt me with how fat you are, Stephen teased. I won't have enough to feed you. The bird pecked him again, harder this time. Stephen winced and chuckled, all right, sorry. I take it back, you're just, pleasantly plump. The bird gave him an indignant look but settled down in his hands as they headed back toward the village. Chapter 3, Strange Bird. Third person's POV. Look, Yuno. Stephen brought lunch. Asta shouted, pointing excitedly at Stephen, who was carrying the chubby bird in his hands. The bird glared at Asta before turning a suspicious eye toward Stephen. Sorry, Asta, this little chubby thing isn't for eating, Stephen replied with a shake of his head. Then what is it? Asta asked, tilting his head in confusion. It's going to be my magical familiar, Stephen said dramatically. So cool! Asta exclaimed, stars shining in his eyes. Do you think I can get my own magical familiar? Of course you can. If you can't find one, I'll help, Stephen said confidently, patting Asta on the back. It looks hurt. Said softly, noticing the bandaged bird in Stephen's hands. That's because it is. I'm going to nurse. Stephen paused, then looked down at the bird. Wait, are you a boy or a girl? The bird blinked at him. 1 nod for boy, 2 nods for girl, got it? Stephen clarified. The bird nodded once. Whoa! It understands you! Asta exclaimed in amazement. So, is it a boy? Asked. I think it was just answering my question if it understood. All right, go ahead. 1 nod for boy, 2 for girl. They all stared at the bird, which nodded twice. Stephen raised his hand triumphantly. And she has spoken. What's her name, then? Asked. Shebird, Stephen said proudly before walking off to nurse her back to health. Shebird stared at Stephen as if he were an idiot, then covered her face with her good wing in exasperation. The next day, Stephen returned to his training spot in the woods, repeating the motions of casting a shield. The magical barrier flickered before dissipating again. Stephen smiled, satisfied with his progress, before glancing over at Shebird, who was resting in a makeshift nest, her wings bandaged. Pretty cool, right? Stephen puffed his chest out proudly. Shebird stared at him blankly. What do you mean, is that all? I worked tirelessly to be able to do that. Stephen huffed, crossing his arms. You don't even need to say anything. You're pretty expressive for a bird. Shebird just blinked at him, clearly unimpressed. Stephen scoffed. You're the idiot, he muttered before turning his focus back to his magic. It became their daily routine. Stephen helped with chores, grabbed Shebird and went out to practice magic in the forest. Each day, his shield became more vibrant and stable. After a week of practice, the shield was finally solid. Pretty sick, right? Stephen said, grinning. Now that I've semi-mastered the shield, it's time to move on to other shapes and manipulation of my magic. Shebird, now looking much healthier, actually seemed to agree, nodding slightly. Sparks flew from Stephen's hands as he clapped them together. He slowly spread them apart, trying to create an eldritch whip. As he stretched the magical energy, it snapped in the middle, causing him to click his tongue in frustration. But Stephen wasn't one to give up. He hadn't come this far by quitting, so he started again. And again. And again. Shebird just watched, impressed by his relentless dedication, though she did find his magic a bit strange. I've got it! Stephen suddenly exclaimed. Every time I fail a spell, I'll punish myself by exercising. That way, when I don't want to exercise anymore, my body will just do the spell out of instinct. Stephen said proudly, as if he'd uncovered the greatest secret in existence. Since I failed, let's start small with some push UPS. After barely 5 push UPS, Stephen was gasping for air. Okay, wow. That was pathetic, hey. Shebird looked at him, as if saying, yeah, it was. You didn't have to agree, Stephen grumbled, catching his breath. To train magic, I've gotta train the vessel it resides in, he muttered to himself. The next day, Stephen updated his schedule, help with chores, go for a run, and practice magic. During his runs, he trained Shebird to fly again with her now healed wing, giving her some much-needed physical therapy. Afterward, he returned to the forest to practice his magic. Every time he failed a spell, he would train his body, but not to the point of exhaustion. By the time he returned home for dinner, he was physically spent, unable to practice magic late into the night like he used to. 1 week later, Stephen clapped his hands together and pulled them apart, an eldritch whip materializing between them. It was thin but solid, its magical energy flickering at the edges. Stephen twirled it around, testing its flexibility before releasing the spell with a triumphant fist pump. Yes! I did it! Stephen shouted excitedly. He ran over to Shebird, scooping her up and planting a kiss on her chubby body. "You're my little good luck charm." Shebird rolled her eyes at the over-the-top affection. However, her wings had fully healed by now, and she gave him a soft peck on the head before hopping onto his shoulder. But as Stephen celebrated, Shebird gently nudged him, then flew over to a nearby tree, gazing toward the horizon. There, in the distance, stood a giant demonic skull with the statue of the first Wizard King, the title given to the greatest wizard of them all. Stephen's face fell. "Wait, are you leaving?" he asked softly. Shebird gazed at him for a moment before tilting her head toward the skull, indicating her new home. "Ah. So, that's where you're going to stay." "You're not really leaving, then," Stephen said, trying to hide his disappointment. Shebird swayed side to side. "So, we'll be more like neighbors than roommates," Stephen chuckled awkwardly, already understanding what she meant through her body language. Feeling embarrassed, Stephen hesitated before asking, "Will we have sleepovers?" His ears turned bright red as the words left his mouth. He immediately covered his face in embarrassment, regretting asking such a silly question. Shebird seemed amused by his awkwardness and chirped softly. She leaned in to rub her head against his cheek, a gesture of gratitude for everything he'd done, before taking off toward the statue. Though Stephen would miss seeing her all the time, he smiled, knowing she'd still be just around the corner. Age 6. Stephen conjured a shield, then swiftly dissipated it, forming a whip in an instant. He pretended to block an invisible attack before shifting back to the shield, which he threw toward a nearby tree. The construct shattered on impact, but a tiny mark remained, showing that, while it had dissipated, it still did some damage. Stephen paused, exhaling deeply as his breath turned visible in the cold air, the snow falling gently around him. "I think I'm ready to try the first spell I memorized. Though I'm choosing this one because it'll help with my training," Stephen thought to himself. He suddenly felt something move atop his head, causing him to sigh again. For someone who was planning to fly away, you sure are clingy. The chubby bird, now affectionately known as Shebird, snuggled into his hair and chirped contentedly. "So that's all I am to you, body heat?" "I'm disappointed in our relationship," Stephen teased with a smirk. Looking up, he realized it was getting late. "Oh shoot, Father Orsi is going to be pissed." Without another word, Stephen sprinted through the snowy forest, racing downhill toward the church. As he approached, he spotted Father Orsi pacing nervously outside. "Don't worry, Father, I'm here." "Sorry to make you worry. It's not you I'm worried about." "Ow. I suppose," Stephen winced. Father Orsi sighed. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just that went out on an errand, and Asta followed him. They should have been back by now. I can't help but worry for them. I'll find them. Shebird can help as my eyes in the sky," Stephen declared, already dashing toward the town with Shebird soaring above him. "Wait!" Father Orsi called out, but Stephen was already too far to hear him. Chapter 4, Strange Committed Spells, 1. Third Person's POV. Stephen ran through the snow, keeping an eye on his flying companion. He spotted Shebird circling above the center of town. When Stephen arrived, he found Asta covered in wounds and in tears. The man standing before them glanced at Asta with mild surprise, but Stephen's face twisted in anger when he saw the man holding Yuno's necklace. Forming a hand sign, Stephen summoned a shield in front of his fist. He hurled the shield forward, leaped after it, then conjured another shield midair, using them as stepping stones. He dashed toward the man, ready for a fight. The man looked at Stephen in surprise as he saw him slam his wrists together before cocking his fists back, shields forming at each hand. The man had no time to react before Stephen struck him across the face with one of the shields, knocking him backward. However, Stephen misjudged his jump and tumbled onto the snowy ground, rolling as he fell from too great a height for someone his age. The man, who had staggered back, held his bleeding lips, looking at them in shock. All right. I'll leave you kids alone. What's wrong with this village, man?" he exclaimed before turning to flee. Stephen quickly got to his feet, clapping his hands together and pulling them apart to form an eldritch whip. He lashed it out, wrapping it around the man's leg, and yanked hard, causing the man to fall face first into the snow, breaking his nose. "Ah!" The man screamed in pain. "Forget something?" Stephen asked, walking toward him with his hands in his pockets. "Here. Take it back. Just stay the hell away from me." The man yelled, tossing the pendant to Stephen, who caught it effortlessly with one hand. Stephen watched as the man scrambled to his feet and ran off. Then, he turned toward Yuno, who was kneeling beside Asta, who lay on his back, breathing heavily. Asta, are you okay? Yuno asked worriedly. Magic is everything in this world, hey? Asta said in a shaky voice. Well then, I'll become someone. Even though I'm a poor orphan who can't use any magic yet, he continued, slowly getting to his feet. I'll prove to everyone that even someone like us can be amazing. Despite his battered face, Asta smiled brightly. I'll become the Wizard King. Yuno looked at Asta in awe. I'll do it too. He declared. I'll become the Wizard King as well. Seriously? Asta said, wiping his bloody nose. Well then, that makes you my rival. They both turned to Stephen, who raised an eyebrow. Well? Asta asked. Well what? Stephen responded. Aren't you going to declare that you're aiming to be the Wizard King too? Yuno asked, tilting his head in confusion. Nah, there's already enough competition for that position. If I ran the race, it'd be unfair for both of you. Hey! They both shouted in unison. I'm going to be something else entirely, Stephen said, placing the necklace back around Yuno's neck. They both stared at Stephen in confusion, but he just smirked. I'm going to be the Sorcerer Supreme. That's not a title, Yuno said with a straight face. Yeah, you just made that up, Asta said, shaking his head. It still sounds cool though, right? Asta and Yuno nodded in agreement. It did sound cool. They exchanged a look and smirked. I guess that means it'll be a race to see who gets their title first. Asta said, thrusting out both his fists toward Stephen and Yuno. Stephen scoffed in amusement, and Yuno smiled as they bumped their fists together. Above them, Shebird silently watched, flapping her wings. Stephen then wrapped his arms around their shoulders. Now, let's head home. Father Orsi was worried about you too. And Asta, you need to get those injuries checked by Sister Lily, he said, ruffling their hair as they walked back. Dash. The next day, Stephen noticed that Asta and Yuno were nowhere to be found. Eventually, he spotted Sister Lily cleaning around the church. Where's Asta and Yuno? Stephen asked. They mentioned something about training to become the Wizard King, Sister Lily replied with a smile, ruffling his hair. I take it you are going to do the same. Training? Yes. Wizard King? No. I have other plans. Anyway, later, Sister Lily. Stephen said as he headed to his usual training spot. He found Shebird perched on a branch, waiting. Ready for the most incredible spell you've ever seen? It'll help with my training. Seeing Shebird's curiosity, Stephen smirked. Watch this, let's see if I remember this correctly, he muttered. He closed his eyes and made intricate hand signs, rotating his fists and pressing his index and middle fingers together. By the image of Icon, I conjure thee. I conjure me, he whispered. 2 more sets of hands appeared behind Stephen, each forming different gestures before 2 duplicates of Stephen manifested at his sides. Stephen pumped his fist in excitement. These are mostly illusions, but I can use them to train myself in combat. For example, his clones summoned eldritch whips and attacked him. Stephen quickly conjured 2 shields, which shattered under the whip strikes but still protected him. Puffing his chest with pride, Stephen grinned. You don't have to say anything. I can see it in your eyes. You think I'm smart. I think so too. With this, I can train both my illusion spells and my fighting skills, making them stronger for battle. He clapped his wrists together, summoning 2 shields in front of his fists. With that, Stephen began training in both the mystical arts and martial arts, even if it was against himself. And so the months passed, and Stephen's efficiency in eldritch manipulation increased as he continued his relentless training. As he practiced his Image of Icon spell, he gradually learned to increase the number of illusionary selves he could create. After 10 months, Stephen was able to summon up to 12 copies. By the time he turned 7, he could summon them without any incantations at all. With his mastery over this spell solidified, Stephen decided to move on to the next incantation he remembered from the ancient books of spells. Sitting at the open mouth of a demonic skull, he had given up his usual training spot to Asta, who needed the space more than he did. Stephen didn't mind training closer to Shebird's home, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Having familiarized himself with the Images of Icon spell, Stephen was ready to attempt his next challenge. He cupped his hands as if cradling a small bird, then released his fingers outward, mimicking the motion of a raven taking flight. With 2 fingers pointed forward, he closed his eyes and muttered in deep concentration, Corvus excubiter, oculos tuas dona mei. From his shadow, a raven shot out but quickly dissipated into black smoke. Stephen clicked his tongue in frustration. Shebird, perched on a nearby nest, tilted her head in confusion. Stephen sighed and rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. It's supposed to summon a spectral raven that can fly to distant locations and relay information back to me. It can even detect hidden enemies or magical traps. But as you can see, it's harder than it looks, Stephen explained with a wry smile. I remember reading about this spell and thinking how useful it would be. It's one of the reasons I committed it to memory, Stephen thought, running a hand through his hair. His white strands stood out starkly, not because of age but simply because he had been born with them. Chapter 5, Strange Committed Spell, 2. Third Person's POV. 2 days later, Stephen finally succeeded in summoning the spectral raven for an extended period. The raven relayed back the information it gathered, allowing Stephen to understand the spell's true potential. Just like with the illusion spell, Stephen continued practicing until the summoning became effortless. Unlike the illusion spell, which took him 10 months to master, he perfected the raven spell in just 6 months, half the time. Back in the forest, Stephen was now training with Asta. Although you can't use magic yet, you should at least be able to fight. That's why you and I are going to constantly spar, Stephen said as they squared off. Will you also teach Yuno how to fight? Asta asked curiously. With how much I rely on magic, Yuno's style would be more suited for magical combat, Stephen explained as they began their session, both shirtless, aiming blows at each other. The punches and moves we use will be unrefined, as we're still amateurs. But every fighting style starts from nothing and gets refined with constant practice. We're the same. We don't have teachers showing us what's right or wrong, Stephen added. You say you're an amateur, but you're totally kicking my ass. Asta whined, dodging Stephen's hits. That's because I record everything I do and refine it every time I use it. I've learned how to eliminate unnecessary movements, make myself more efficient, and shorten my actions. It's taken me years of constant fighting mostly against myself to get to this level. You're lucky, though. You won't have to go through all that since I'm teaching you. Asta, with tears of gratitude in his eyes, shouted, You're the best, Stephen. Teaching me all your hard work. Yeah, I know. Now get into the proper stance like I told you, Stephen responded, amused. As they continued sparring, Stephen noticed how quickly Asta picked up physical combat techniques. It's like his lack of magic has transferred all his potential into his physical abilities, he thought. Damn, Asta. We might have found your calling. You and Yuno are complete opposites. He excels at magic while you excel at fighting. Where Yuno is naturally gifted, you make up for it with hard work and determination. You're loud and boisterous, Yuno's more soft-spoken. Oi! Was that last part really necessary? Asta shouted in protest. Ignoring Asta, Stephen smirked and asked, Shall we continue? Let's do this. Asta yelled, pumped up. Maybe with this training, I'll finally unlock my magic. After sparring with both Yuno and Asta, Stephen sat down to think about which spell to learn next. Shebird perched on his shoulder as he drew in the dirt with a stick, circling 3 words, offensive, defensive, and auxiliary. All right, I have one of each type of spell to master. Shebird, you seem like a smart little lady. Which one should I focus on next? Without hesitation, Shebird hopped into the defensive circle. When she looked up, Stephen gave her a teasing smirk. You must really care about me. You want me to learn a defensive spell to stay safe, hey? Shebird huffed, flying up to a nearby branch, clearly not in the mood for his teasing. Stephen chuckled, Don't worry, I care about you too. Standing up, he stretched his arms and muttered to himself, Let's see, how did it go again? He focused, and the tips of his index and middle fingers began to glow with eldritch magic. Starting with one hand at the bottom and the other at the top, he moved them in opposite directions, forming a glowing circle in the air. 2 more circles quickly overlapped with the first. Then, with a quick knock on his wrist, he summoned a large shield that filled the center circle. Another knock on his wrist summoned 2 smaller shields, which he punched into the outer circles. With both fists outstretched, Stephen began raising the spell above his head, connecting all his fingers except his thumbs, right by his chest. Slowly, he spread his arms wide, causing the spell to expand and form a protective dome around him. Throughout the process, he muttered the incantation over and over again, focusing hard, Etheris sanctum me protegat. But as the dome started forming, it shook slightly. Stephen furrowed his brow, shutting his eyes in concentration. Despite his efforts, the spell shattered, raining eldritch embers around him. Stephen sighed and sat down. Just so we're clear, if I tried that in battle, I'd be dead by the time I finished the first syllable. Yeah, it's unnecessarily long. But that's why we train, to shorten the incantation. The effect is worth it though. This spell, Etheris Sanctum, the Sanctuary of Ether, creates a protective dome around me and anyone close by. It shields us from both physical and magical attacks. The hard part is concentrating enough to maintain it. To his surprise, Stephen mastered the spell in just 5 months, far faster than he expected. His ability to control eldritch energy grew sharper with each training session, increasing his proficiency with every new spell. Stephen hadn't learned a new spell since he turned 10 years old. When he was 10, he had been eager to begin practicing the axillary spell. Shepard had insisted on saving the offensive spell for last, believing it might be dangerous and wanting Stephen to be fully prepared before attempting it. This one is actually a very simple spell, Shepard explained. It's called Dark Wings. Volucri tenebrarum, de mihi alas fugi. Stephen exclaimed as he crossed his arms, mimicking the motion of flight. In an instant, he unfolded them rapidly, dissolving into a flock of shadowy birds. When the flock reformed into his original shape, Stephen grinned with satisfaction. I got that on my first try. The real surprise came when he mastered the spell in just 1 month. After that success, Stephen wasted no time and immediately moved on to the final spell he remembered, an offensive spell once used by the original Doctor Strange. When Stephen found it in the book of spells he bought, alongside the spell The Image of Icon, he assumed that whoever compiled the book must have been a fan of the comics, recording all the spells they'd seen like some sort of magical archive. By the bolts of Balthak! Stephen shouted, thrusting his hands out to his sides. Large orbs crackling with lightning materialized around his hands. With a swift motion, Stephen extended his arms, sending bolts of lightning flying from his fingertips, obliterating everything in their path. A wide, excited smirk spread across his face as he stared at his electrified hands. Laughing in exhilaration, he marveled at the raw power surging through him. Having finally mastered all 5 of his spells, Stephen didn't waste a moment. He trained relentlessly, honing each one, working tirelessly to improve his combat efficiency. He trained day after day, and before he knew it, 5 years had passed, and he was now 15. Chapter 6, Strange Grimoire. Third person's POV. Sister Lily, please marry me. Asta shouted, dropping to one knee and holding a single flower in his hand. Suddenly, 2 eldritch whips appeared, wrapping around Asta's entire body, including his mouth, and began dragging him away. He made muffled struggling noises as he was pulled back. I'm sorry about him, Sister Lily, sighed Stephen, the wielder of the eldritch whips. I thought I had taught him better than this. Sister Lily smiled and shook her head. It's never a quiet morning when Asta's around, that's for sure. See, Asta? She's calling you annoying, Stephen teased, shaking his head at Asta, who continued to squirm. That's not what I said. Sister Lily stammered awkwardly, as everyone nearby busied themselves with their chores. Yuno used his wind magic to dry the laundry while Stephen, releasing his eldritch whips, summoned an eldritch saw to cut logs into neat piles. You're all the same age, but the difference between you 3 is like night and day, one of the younger kids muttered, glancing at Asta. Stephen and Yuno are the pride of our little church. Father Orsi declared happily. A few of the children crowded around Stephen and Yuno. You and Yuno might really work alongside the Wizard King someday. They exclaimed, their eyes wide with admiration. Stephen winked at them. Yuno, maybe you should ask for an autograph now. You might be able to sell it for a fortune someday. He teased, making them giggle. Meanwhile, Asta lay on the ground, his soul seemingly floating out of his body in defeat. Now, Asta, Sister Lily said gently, patting his shoulder. It's almost time for the ceremony where you'll receive your grimoire. Who knows? You might finally be able to use magic. You're right, Sister Lily. Asta said, tears brimming in his eyes. Once I get my grimoire, I'll finally become the Wizard King. And then, I'll marry you. Sister Lily smiled, though her expression remained awkward. Now then, I shall train until the ceremony starts. Asta suddenly shouted, dashing off with renewed determination. Why does he always yell so much? One of the kids grumbled. To be heard. Stephen replied. The children turned to him in confusion. What do you mean by that? One of them asked. He screams to be heard. People always look down on him because he's an orphan, and because he can't use magic. It's like a double whammy. So, he feels like he has to shout, to make people pay attention. Really? Father Orsi asked, surprised. Stephen shook his head with a sigh. Come on, Father. How have you not noticed? After finishing with the logs, Stephen decided it was time to prepare for the ceremony. In the bathroom, Stephen stared at his shirtless reflection. His body was toned and muscular, bearing a few scars from his rigorous training with Asta and Yuno. His hair, slicked back, reached his neck, with two distinct white tufts framing his face. Water dripped from his hair as he ran his fingers through it one last time before slipping on his blue shirt. With a sharp whistle, Shebird, his familiar, flew over and landed on his head. Soon, they made their way to the ceremony, held in a towering library-like structure. Stephen spotted Asta and Yuno standing a short distance away, while the rest of the church members looked on nervously. Welcome, young ones. The announcer boomed, but Stephen found himself spacing out, eagerly awaiting his grimoire. Now, for the grimoires. Books began floating in the air, surrounded by a magical aura, making their way toward their destined owners. The crowd gasped as a brilliantly glowing grimoire floated toward Yuno. Its cover gleamed with a four-leaf clover. A four-leaf clover grimoire. A commoner got it. Could he be the one destined to become the Wizard King? At least he's kinda cute. Before the crowd could continue their murmurs, a sound like shattering glass echoed through the chamber. All eyes turned toward Stephen, whose space before him cracked and splintered. Slowly, a massive grimoire the size of a textbook emerged, its thick pages pulsing with an orange energy. The space around it mended as the book fully materialized, its royal purple cover adorned with red highlights. But what left everyone speechless was something else entirely. Is that a six-leaf clover? Someone whispered. Pandemonium erupted. I thought the most was 4 leaves. If there's 6, then there must be a 5-leaf one out there too. And isn't he a commoner as well? What is going on? Who is he? And why does he have that grimoire? Annoyed by the attention, Stephen clicked his tongue, grabbed his grimoire, and made a quick hand sign. In a flash, he dissolved into a flock of shadowy birds, scattering across the room. Moments later, the birds coalesced into Stephen's form in the forest where he often trained. Sitting down and crossing his legs, Stephen studied his grimoire. The book's purple and red cover bore a golden 6-leaf clover, but at its center was a symbol that resembled an Egyptian hieroglyph of an eye. As he examined it, Shebird landed on his shoulder, her eyes filled with curiosity. I'm nervous to open this, Stephen muttered, glancing at her. She rubbed her face against his, offering silent support. Taking a deep breath, Stephen opened the book. As soon as he did, glowing orange glyphs appeared, shifting and morphing before his eyes. Both Stephen and Shebird found themselves growing drowsy as they stared at the mesmerizing glyphs. When Stephen opened his eyes, he was no longer in the forest. Instead, he stood inside a grand library, surrounded by endless shelves of books. Where the hell am I? He muttered in awe. Stephen! A voice called out. Startled, Stephen jumped back and conjured eldritch shields in his hands, ready to defend himself. Before him stood a girl about shoulder height, wearing a short black dress, short black hair with devil horns sprouting from her head. Who the hell are you? Are you the guardian of this library? Stephen asked warily. The girl stared back with deadpan eyes. Those soulless, judgmental eyes. Shebird? Is that really you? Stephen asked, tilting his head in confusion. Secret. My name is Secret, she replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Chapter 7, Strange Library. Third person's POV. You've seen me take a bath. You've seen my willy. Stephen blurted out, lying on the ground in sheer mortification. I'm impure. A girl has seen me naked before marriage. Secret looked down at him with a deadpan expression, though there was a faint flush on her pale cheeks. So, where are we? Secret asked, eager to change the subject as she glanced around their surroundings. Stephen, now standing up and brushing himself off, surveyed the area as well. My best guess, this is the true nature of my grimoire. The book in my hands earlier, it's just an entrance, a doorway. How do you know that? I just do, Stephen replied, the certainty in his voice unshakable. It's instinctual. I'm connected to it. I can feel it. This is amazing, Secret marveled, walking in awe through the tall shelves lined with books and scrolls. I knew you were special, but this... Stephen's expression turned serious as he looked at her. You know. I'm still not over the fact that you're an actual person, he said slowly. Answer me honestly, have you been staying in your bird form just to keep an eye on me? To make sure I wouldn't suspect anything? Secret chuckled at his suspicion, shaking her head. No. The bird form is the result of forbidden magic, a consequence of a spell. This is the first time I've been in human form in over 500 years. Stephen's jaw dropped. 500 years? You're that old? Secret shot him a familiar glare, the same one she gave him while in bird form. It made Stephen shrink back in embarrassment, rubbing the back of his head. Sorry. Secret rolled her eyes, continuing to explore the shelves. She reached for a book, but when she opened it, her brow furrowed in confusion. What's wrong? Stephen asked, walking over. It's empty, Secret said, showing him the blank pages. Stephen looked at the book, equally confused. What are you talking about? It's full of text. The pages are blank to me, she repeated. Maybe it's because you're not the owner, Stephen suggested. Secret sighed, closing the book. That's probably it. Since you're the rightful owner, I guess I'm just an intruder here. Stephen narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing her closely. What? Secret asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm just trying to figure out if I can trust you, Stephen said bluntly. With what, exactly? She asked cautiously. A secret of mine. I mean, I've known you for a long time, so, never mind. Do you even have a last name, or is it just Secret? It's Secret Swallowtail, she replied, her confusion growing. Why? Stephen took a deep breath, placing his hand gently on top of her head between her horns. All right. Stephen Strange, give Secret Swallowtail permission to read the books in this library. Secret stared at him, wide-eyed. You have a last name? Are you of noble birth? Stephen shrugged. I don't know. I just remember Father Orsi reading that name to me when he picked me up as a kid. You remembered that? Photographic memory, Stephen explained with a smirk. Secret seemed deep in thought. Strange. I feel like I've heard that name before, but I can't quite recall from where. It's not strange at all, Stephen chuckled. You're 500 years old, I'm surprised you even remember your own last name. Very funny, Secret said dryly before flipping open the book again. It worked, I can see the words now. Wait, seriously? Stephen asked, surprised. Secret nodded, though she frowned slightly. Yes, but... I still don't understand them. Stephen peered over her shoulder, and sure enough, the language was unfamiliar to both of them. Looks like it's written in some other language. Figures, Secret sighed, closing the book and placing it back on the shelf. Where do we even begin? I wish there was some kind of guide to this place, Stephen muttered, scratching his head. At that moment, a book wiggled out from a top shelf and floated down into his hands. The cover read, The Rules and Guide. Well, that was convenient, Stephen remarked with amusement. All right, let's see what we've got here. He began reading aloud to Secret. The rules. 1 time limit, you are permitted entry to the library for no longer than 24 hours at a time. Upon reaching this limit, you will automatically return to your physical body. 2 time dilation, time flows differently in the library. 24 hours in the library equals 1 hour in the physical world. Use this advantage wisely. 3 no physical withdrawal, books and scrolls cannot leave the library. If you wish to reference any material outside, your grimoire will generate the specific pages needed, but these will only appear temporarily while you study or cast. Stephen raised an eyebrow, impressed. This is kinda cool, not gonna lie. Flipping through the guide, his eyes lit up as he found something exciting. Whoa, it's a map! He exclaimed, showing it to Secret. There's a beginner's section, Secret noted, pointing to a spot on the map. You should probably check it out. There's also a martial arts scroll section, Steven said, grinning. Secret gave him a wary look. Are all these spells just available to you? That seems a bit overpowered. I wouldn't trust it. Power like this always comes with a price. Trust me, I would know. She gestured to her horns. There's a difference with my magic, Steven explained. Other people's grimoires reveal spells they can use right away, but with mine, I actually have to train to be able to cast a spell. I need to learn the incantations and hand signs. It's a bit of a hassle, to be honest. I see, Secret nodded, now understanding. She had seen him train endlessly to master even the simplest spells. So that's the price you pay. Yup, Steven said, studying the map. Shall we head to the beginners section? Secret agreed, and they followed the map until they reached a sign for the section. Nearby, there was a reading table, and Steven, thinking aloud, asked, "Are there any books for beginners in magic?" Several books immediately floated down from the shelves and hovered in front of them. This library is sentient, Secret said, surprised. Steven grinned. Let's find out. Pick the best book for me to read. The majority of the books returned to the shelves, leaving only one floating in front of Steven. He grabbed it and read the title, Way of the Arcane, Book 1. Arcane? Secret asked. Steven raised an eyebrow. I never told you. Told me what? The name of my magic, he said with a smirk. It's called Mystic Arts, Arcane Magic. Chapter 8, Strange New Nickname. Third Person's POV. Hey, do you think if I call out for a book, it would appear for me too? Secret asked curiously. Steven shrugged. I don't know, but it's worth a try. A book about sealing magic. Secret exclaimed, holding up her hands. PHTTT. Steven covered his mouth when he saw nothing happen, while Secret stood there with her arms outstretched. Hearing Steven laugh, Secret blushed and lowered her arms. It looks like only the owner gets to order the library around, even if another person is given special access and privileges, Secret muttered, making a note of it. A book of sealing magic for my friend here. Steven called out, then turned to her. You specialize in sealing magic? He asked, a bit surprised and intrigued. Secret simply nodded in confirmation. When he looked back at the book that appeared, Steven began to laugh. The book in front of them read, Sealing Magic for Dummies. Secret turned toward Steven with her usual deadpan expression. Hey, I don't think this library likes me very much. It would seem so, Steven smirked as he opened up his book and studied the first page. Secret picked up the book in front of her. However, as she opened it, she froze. It was written in a completely different language. Mr. Library. What did I do to deserve such hostility? Secret muttered to herself and the library. It isn't the library's fault, Steven said, still reading his book. Secret looked at Steven in confusion, wondering what he meant. The first lesson in the mystic arts isn't magical in the slightest. It's about learning other languages. Which honestly makes sense, well, mostly for me. My spells rely on incantations, and many of these spells are in other languages, so we have to overcome the language barrier. Although I agree with what you said, I still think this library dislikes me for some reason. Secret said, shaking her head, still not convinced. Give me your best book about language learning lessons, Steven ordered. Soon after, a large book appeared in front of him titled Language Arts and Studies. Your grimoire is so convenient, I'm honestly a bit jealous, Secret said with a small smile. Steven held up a finger and rapidly flipped through each page of the book. After a minute or so, he handed it back to her. Here. Secret looked a bit confused, then finally remembered. That's right, you have photographic memory. Steven nodded. But even though I've memorized each page, I haven't fully digested the information yet. I still need to study it. This way, we can study together. Secret smiled as she ran her fingers through the book. She walked over to the study table and pulled out a chair. Shall we? Steven scoffed in amusement. I guess we don't have any other choice. Both Secret and Steven sat down and began studying. Steven leaned back with his eyes closed, while Secret read the pages, swinging her feet, happy to finally read a book for the first time in over 500 years. Due to Stephen's high intellect, he was able to absorb the content much faster than Secret, almost 3 times faster. While it took him 2 hours, it took Secret almost 6. When Stephen finished, he stood up and began walking around the library. I'd better learn this one first before anything else. Give me a book on astral projection, Stephen ordered. Once the book appeared in his hands, he started reading while walking around. I feel like this one will be easier to learn since I already know what it feels like for 2 reasons. Stephen mumbled as he continued reading. We're in our astral bodies right now inside our grimoires, which is why we can only stay here for 24 hours before returning to our physical bodies. And not to mention the reincarnation spell I did, so I should be able to learn this quickly. It'll give me an advantage in studying. Stephen spent the entire 24 hours he had available to him studying as much as possible, which wasn't difficult for him due to his mental abilities. Meanwhile, Secret simply enjoyed the pleasure of reading, casually learning new things. As their 24 hours in the library were coming to an end, Secret turned to Stephen. I want you to give me a new nickname. Hey! Stephen raised an eyebrow. I hate the nickname you gave me. I was never able to express it before, but now I can. Give me another one. I hate it. What's wrong with Shebird? That's a lovely nickname. You only named me that because you found out I was a girl and a bird. As I said, I hate it. A new nickname, hey. Stephen rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I guess that makes sense since you're not really a bird anymore. Let's see. Stephen looked her up and down, causing Secret to grow self-conscious. He tilted his head, confused. What? She asked, noticing his expression. You know, this is actually the first time I'm really getting a good look at you. I was so distracted with the library and studying that I didn't notice, but you're pretty cute, hey. What are you talking about? Secret stammered, caught off guard by Stephen's words. She quickly regained her composure, glaring at him. Are you going to pick a new nickname or not? Stephen just smiled at her glare and became thoughtful again. Since we learned many languages today, let's pick something from that, and since you're mostly black. Noir. No. Kuro. No, that sounds more like a dog's name. Negro. Are you even trying at this point? Sorry, Stephen chuckled before snapping his fingers. I got it. Nero. It's Italian, and it means black and strong. Nero, hey. I quite like that one, actually, Secret said with a smile, just as they were both whisked away and transported back to their physical bodies. Back outside the grimoire, both Stephen and Nero's eyes snapped open as they returned to their bodies. Stephen closed his grimoire and sighed. Talk about an out-of-body experience, am I right? Nero. Nero smirked as she chirped and nodded her small head in confirmation. Now let's go, and Stephen's words were cut off. Stefan. Asta's excited voice echoed as he ran up, holding a black book high above his head. I finally found you. I knew you'd be here. Look. Look. It's my very own grimoire. Stephen was taken aback, both by Asta's shouting and by having his grimoire shoved into his face. Whoa. You actually managed to get one. Congrats, Asta. Stephen exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. He put an arm around Asta's shoulder and ruffled his hair. Look at you, finally able to perform some magic. As they say, patience is a virtue, and those who wait shall be rewarded. Asta rubbed the back of his head, grinning sheepishly. He. So, what's your magic? I imagine if you had to wait this long to get it, it must be pretty amazing, Stephen wondered. I saw Yuno and some guy fighting, and when I jumped in, this appeared. Asta stepped back, and his grimoire floated up. Slowly, it revealed a massive buster sword. Stephen was slightly surprised by the sword. He would have been more shocked if he hadn't just come from his magical library. Okay, that's kinda cool, Stephen said, clearly impressed. Right. So what does it do? I think it can cut through magic. Asta exclaimed, swinging the sword up and down excitedly. In a world where magic is everything? Isn't that kinda overpowered? Stephen asked. Asta grinned, giving him a thumbs up. Totally. I'm so excited to see what else this thing can do. Chapter 9, Strange Past Months. Third Person's POV. A 5-leaf clover. Stephen questioned as he studied Asta's grimoire. Asta scratched his head in confusion. Yeah, I don't know what that means either. Hat, it's kinda like we're counting. You know has a 4-leaf, I have a 5-leaf, and you have a 6-leaf. Okay, quick question, have you studied any martial arts that involve wielding a big sword? Asta, what do you think? Stephen replied dryly. Sorry, I was just curious since the Magic Knight exam is in 6 months, and I really want to use this efficiently by then. Asta said, picking up the sword and swinging it around. Nero then lightly pecked Stephen and landed on his grimoire. Oh, right. Asta, I think I might actually have something for you. Eh? Seriously? I only asked you hopefully, I didn't actually expect you to have something, Asta said in surprise. Stephen picked up his grimoire and began flipping through the pages. Now, where's the search bar on this thing? He released his hand from the book as it floated in front of him, orange runes glowing above it. Whoa! Asta muttered, entranced by how mystical it appeared. All right, show me a martial arts scroll related to the use of a buster sword, Stephen asked his grimoire. The glowing orange runes retreated back into the book as the pages rapidly flipped. Soon, images of a person wielding a buster sword step by step began to appear. Here, train in every move shown here once, commit it to memory, then start perfecting them, Stephen advised, flipping the grimoire over so Asta could see. Asta nodded in agreement and held his buster sword like it was shown in the images. He started moving and stepping as the pictures displayed. He slashed the sword in one direction, turned to look at the next image, and followed that sequence. After repeating all the images once, Asta began doing it in one fluid motion, without stopping to look at the pictures. All right, I think I got it. Thank you, Stephen. Honestly, Asta said, smiling. Stephen scoffed. Don't thank me, just keep practicing. Asta's expression turned serious as he nodded and continued swinging and cleaving his sword around. He spun it over his head before striking at an angle, then switched to an upward slash. Once Stephen saw Asta focused on his training, he silently walked away to focus on his own. He sat down on a large boulder and laid the book on his lap. The pages on astral projection. The words and images of the buster sword shifted and changed, and information about the astral body began to appear. Stephen then moved his hands in a series of hand signs before finishing with a triangle gesture, pushing it outward from his body. Stephen let out a sharp gasp as his astral form left his body. As he floated away, he turned to look at himself. Well, that was easy. I'm practically a natural at this once I have a guide in front of me on how to do things, he said proudly to himself before returning to his body. 2 months later. In the middle of the night, Stephen's body was seen resting with his eyes closed. Around him, his astral body was kicking its feet as he rapidly flipped through the pages of his grimoire. The mirror dimension. He muttered with a large smile on his face. Shouldn't be too hard for the great old Stephen Strange. Stephen spent the entire night studying and preparing to enter the mirror dimension. The next morning, he returned to the giant demon skull, with Nero perched on his shoulders, curiously watching Stephen. Stephen hadn't told her anything about what he had been learning, wanting to surprise her. Around Stephen's arm, eldritch magic circles appeared. He turned toward her and asked, "Ready?" Nero simply shrugged her wings. Stephen lifted his arm and tapped the air in front of him, which soon began splintering like glass, surprising Nero slightly as Stephen calmly walked through it. Nero looked at the crack in confusion and then at Stephen. This, my beautiful feathery friend, is known as the mirror dimension. You know when you look at a mirror and see another version of yourself? Well, we're in that dimension right now. Nero looked at Stephen in amazement as he began to explain the practicality of it. If we want to fight someone and don't want to damage the area around us, we bring them here. Not to mention, it's a great place to banish someone. Nero nodded in agreement, still awed by the new discovery. Stephen tapped the glass-like air again, cracking it open and allowing them to leave the mirror dimension. Phew! I was worried I might have messed that up and gotten us stuck there forever. Stephen said, putting a hand over his chest. Nero, in her usual dull, deadpan way, smacked the back of his head with her small wings. 1 month later. Stephen was rapidly moving his hands, gathering an orange ball of energy in his palm. He sent it toward a boulder, which began to compress and change shape, turning into a golden ring with 2 finger holes. Step 1, using the hoary hosts of Hoggoth, check, Stephen smirked, proud of himself. 2 months later. Stephen was inside the mirror dimension, in deep concentration. In his left palm was a magic circle filled with deep orange liquid, while his right hand was pinching and shaping the golden liquid into golden runes. In front of him, the golden two-finger ring floated, surrounded by multiple rings of runes, moving and overlapping each other. When Stephen finished, he began moving his hands closer together, as if squishing a ball. The runes started to close in on the ring until they made contact. It glowed with a bright golden light and, as it released a burst of energy, Stephen quickly tapped his wrists together, creating a giant shield around himself, though he was still pushed back. When the light dissipated, a glowing golden ring hovered, slowly dimming before dropping to the ground. Runes of Coal. Check, Stephen smirked, calling the ring toward him. It levitated and flew into his hand. He slipped it onto his fingers and looked ahead. Visualize where you want to go, he muttered, sticking out his left hand with the ring and rotating it. Sparks flew in front of him before fading away. Stephen sighed and tried again. A wonky circle appeared, then quickly closed. He inhaled deeply, trying to relax. I'm way too excited. I need to calm down. Stephen imagined the demon skull and gently began to make a circle with his hands. A portal slowly opened, and a large grin spread across his face as he stepped out of the mirror dimension and back into the real world. Nero came flying off the statue of the first Wizard King and landed on Stephen's head, puffing her chest with pride at how quickly he was advancing since receiving his grimoire. However, the smile on Stephen's face shifted to a serious expression. Nero detected the sudden change and looked at him with concern. It's time, he muttered. Stephen conjured a stepping stone with magic circles and jumped on top of the demon skull, next to the statue. He spread his arms and closed his eyes. Near the church, in the backyard by a tree, the ground began to shake slightly as if something was trying to escape. After several attempts, the ground cracked, and out popped a wooden box. The box burst open, and out came a red cloak with golden outlines. By the cloak's collar was an amulet with a symbol of an eye. The cloak swayed slightly before spinning around, shaking off the dust, and flying toward the giant demon skull where Stephen Strange stood, arms outstretched. The cloak softly hovered above him before slowly descending and draping itself over his shoulders, with the amulet settling around his neck. Stephen began to levitate from the skull and descended toward the ground. He whipped the cloak back and smirked, like a glove. Chapter 10, Strange Moment to Remember. Third Person's POV. Stephen was sitting inside his grimoire in the magical library, grabbing a book titled The All-Seeing Eye of Agamotto. However, there was another book in his hand, a tome about the use of time magic. Are you sure it's wise to study 2 books at the same time? Nero asked, sitting on the desk with her legs crossed, a hand resting on a book as she looked at Stephen strangely. Are you sure it's wise to be sitting on a table like that with such a short dress on? Stephen retorted with a scoff. Nero narrowed her eyes at him. You're the pervert who's looking. You're the pervert sitting like that in front of me, Stephen shot back. What's that supposed to mean, in front of you? Nero asked defensively, narrowing her eyes. Are you saying you're going to attack me or something? Stephen gained a teasing look and began wiggling his fingers toward her. We're all alone in a library, no one would hear you. Nero scoffed, swatting his hands away. See? Like I said, pervert. Stephen rubbed his hands and pouted, then narrowed his eyes at her. I'll show you who's a pervert, he grumbled before jumping in and tickling her sides. Pfft. He. Stop it. Ha 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 ha. Nero giggled and squirmed, trying to get away from Stephen's reach. Ha ha ha. All right. He. I'm sorry. Nero laughed as she moved her book aside and grabbed Stephen's hands, pushing them away from her waist. As Stephen used his arms for support, the sudden shift made him lose balance, tilting him forward toward Nero. Whoa, Stephen muttered as he lost his balance. He found himself face to face with Nero, who was seated on the table. His hands were planted behind her, boxing her in, while he was trapped between her legs. Both froze in place, unsure of what to do, staring into each other's eyes. The longer they stared, the redder their cheeks became. The tension between them rose as their hands still touched. Are you going to move? Nero mumbled shyly. I don't see you pushing me away. Is that so? Perhaps you're right, Nero muttered. Perhaps I am, Stephen replied, slowly pulling his hand back, Nero's hands following his. Stephen softly flipped his hands over so Nero's hands were now resting on top of his. The size difference between them became apparent. "You have such small, delicate hands," Stephen remarked, caressing her hands with his thumb. "They only look that way because yours are so big and rough from all your exercise and hard work," she muttered, running her middle finger slowly across his rough palm. Stephen lifted their hands slightly, aligning their fingers to emphasize the size difference further. Then, with a slight shift, he interlocked their fingers, holding her hand tightly. They both blushed even harder as they looked back at each other. Nero quickly slipped her hand away, putting a hand on Stephen's chest and pushing him off slightly. She hopped off the table, grabbed her book, and cleared her throat. We don't have much time here. You seemed really interested in what you were studying." "Ah, yeah, that's right," Stephen muttered, backing away and sitting back in his seat while Nero did the same. "So, this Eye of Agamotto, what exactly is it?" Nero asked, trying to regain her composure. "Ah, let's see here," Stephen said, still distracted by what had just happened. The all-seeing Eye of Agamotto is a powerful and mystical artifact that allows the user to see through illusions, mind control, and falsehoods. It's used to detect evil, unveil hidden magic, and reveal the truth. It can even release powerful bursts of mystical energy and be used offensively. "Is it really that powerful?" Nero asked in amazement, the tension between them starting to dissipate. "However, that's only its primary function," Stephen explained as he made an elaborate hand gesture, causing the amulet to slowly open its eye, revealing a glowing golden pupil. Stephen closed his fist and rotated it backward, causing the eye to roll back in the amulet. A new compartment opened, revealing a glowing green stone. "What powerful magic!" Nero muttered in awe. "What?" Stephen asked, a bit taken aback. Nero tilted her head in confusion. "Can't you feel it? That thing is pulsating with magical power. I didn't detect it before because of the amulet. It's blocking all sorts of energy from leaking or being detected." Stephen paid closer attention, his eyes widening. "You're right. I can feel the magic power this thing possesses. That's incredible. If I had to guess, I'd say that apart from blocking detection, it allows the user to harness the power of whatever that stone is." "What did you say its secondary function was?" Nero asked. "Its secondary function is the ability to wield and learn time magic," Stephen said slowly, rolling his fist forward to close the amulet and conceal the stone once more. "I see. So that stone must be some sort of time magic stone," Nero muttered. "Stephen, who seriously were your parents? And why did they leave this stuff to you?" "In all honesty, your guess is as good as mine," Stephen replied, his eyes narrowing at the books in front of him as his expression grew serious. "Since I don't know, the only thing I can do is grow stronger. So when the day comes that I do find out, I'll be ready." Nero blushed at the sight of his focused expression. She quickly buried her face in her book so Stephen wouldn't see. Peeking over the top of it, she watched him ruffle his hair, running his fingers through the white patch, a gesture he subconsciously did when deep in thought. Shaking off the thought, Stephen reopened his book and continued to study everything he could about the Eye of Agamotto and how to wield its power properly. A week later. After finishing a magical sparring session with Yuno, Stephen walked over to Asta, who was training hard as usual. Asta was more muscular now from his constant routine, his shirt off and sweat dripping down his body. He wielded his buster sword with one hand, creating powerful gusts of wind with each swing. Exhausted, Asta dropped to one knee, using his sword for support, panting heavily. "What are you doing here, Stephen?" Asta asked, too tired to muster his usual booming voice, his tongue hanging out like a panting dog. "I wanted to try a spell on you," Stephen explained. "Hey? What, am I your guinea pig?" Asta suddenly found a burst of energy to shout before flopping to the ground and dropping his sword. "Sure, go ahead, man. I don't mind," Asta said, lying on the ground, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. "Thank you. Now, I've been dying to find out what your magic really is." Stephen made a hand sign over his amulet, which slowly opened. His third inner eye also awakened due to the spell he was using. As the magic took hold, Stephen's eyes widened in shock. Something, or someone, seemed to be watching him. Stephen slowly undid the spell, his expression turning tense. Seeing this, Asta furrowed his brows in confusion. "What? Why do you have that look?" "Asta. I mean this in the nicest way I could possibly muster, but... What the fuck is wrong with you? Chapter 11, Strange Lesson. Third Person's POV. Asta was taken aback by Stephen's words and looked at him in confusion. What do you mean by that? Am I going to die? Asta shouted, jumping to his feet and looking at Stephen with worry. No. It's just, you don't possess a single ounce of mana. It's literally zero. Asta, everyone in this world has at least a trace of mana, even if it's minuscule, but you don't. It's like the mana was sucked right out of you. Asta's shoulders slumped. I had a feeling that was the case, but it still hurts hearing you confirm it, he said, rubbing the back of his head. Asta then grew confused. If I don't have mana, why am I able to use this? He asked as he grabbed his grimoire. Stephen placed his hands on Asta's shoulders and began to shake him. Don't you get it? It's because you don't have any mana that the grimoire chose you. Asta, as far as I'm aware, you're the only one in the entire world capable of wielding it. Asta looked at his grimoire, surprised. So, my ability to cut. It's not cutting, Stephen interrupted. Asta tilted his head in confusion. Stephen went on to explain, Asta, what you possess isn't magic, it's anti-magic. You don't cut magic, you nullify it completely. That is seriously overpowered. Asta screamed, holding his grimoire excitedly. However, there's a problem. What? What is it? Asta asked, apprehensive. The source of your power, and what's inside that 5-leaf grimoire of yours is a devil. Even though you don't have any mana, what you're technically using is devil magic, and you're the only one capable of wielding it. It's not wrong to say that the devil chose you, Stephen explained. It chose me. Asta muttered as he held up his grimoire and smiled. Thank you for lending me your power. That's... Stephen hesitated, wanting to warn Asta not to trust it. But seeing Asta's trusting nature, he doubted his warning would matter. Left with no choice, he continued, Asta, we only have 3 weeks until the Magic Night exams, so I'm going to train you on how to properly control and wield your anti-magic, so you don't get consumed by the devil. Asta nodded with an excited expression. I'm ready to learn. Stephen grinned widely. The first lesson. He lunged forward and thrust his palm onto Asta's chest. To Asta's surprise, he was sent flying back, but he could see his body slowly moving. A look of horror crossed his face as he saw his ghostly hands and body. Stephen let out a satisfied sigh. I've always wanted to do that. He muttered with a growing grin. You killed me. I'm dead. Stephen, why? I thought we were brothers. Asta cried, staring at his ghostly hands and looking at Stephen with a betrayed expression. You're not dead, Asta, Stephen scoffed. What you are right now is your astral body, your soul, so to speak. I've separated it from your physical body. You can return whenever you feel like it. Oh. I didn't really understand, but it's good to see that I'm not dead. Asta nodded in relief. So, why am I a ghost again? You're not a ghost, you know what, forget it. What I was saying earlier, your first lesson is about sensing that hidden power within you. It's harder to feel in your physical body, but your spirit is much more sensitive and attuned to the energy around it. Although your astral body and physical body are separated, they're still connected. So, I want you to close your eyes and focus on your physical body, Stephen instructed carefully. Asta followed Stephen's advice, closing his eyes and focusing. His brows knitted in concentration. I think I feel something. I don't know what it is. Is it that anti-magic you were talking about? What you're feeling is the connection to your grimoire and the devil within it. Now, listen closely. Slowly and softly tap into that connection, and like using a straw, gradually draw from it. But not too much. If you take more than your body can handle, the devil might take over. So, control it carefully, Stephen continued. Asta slowly began to extract anti-magic energy from his connection to the grimoire. Stephen noticed a black line appear from Asta's chin, extending past his left eye, accompanied by a small snaggletooth on the same side. This is the most I can manage, Asta grunted. I feel like if I pull any more, I'll lose control. Good, very good actually. You can let go now, Stephen said. Asta watched as the markings receded, and his shoulders slumped. Stephen walked up to Asta's physical body, placed a hand on his chest, and made a pulling motion. Asta's astral body was drawn back into his physical form, and he woke up with a gasp. Stephen, that was terrifying. I really thought you killed me, man. Please warn me next time you plan to do that, Asta pleaded. No promises, Stephen chuckled darkly. Your next lesson is to do what you just did but with your physical body this time. You should now be more familiar with your energy due to your experience with your astral body, though it will be much harder. Asta nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. He focused on drawing from his connection to the anti-magic energy, but it was more difficult than he had expected. It wasn't until his fifth try that he succeeded. When he managed it, he opened his eyes, which had shifted from green to glowing bright red. His expression showed he was struggling slightly. Even though I feel stronger, I have to concentrate so I don't lose control. I'll need to learn how to fight and keep my focus at the same time if I want to use this power effectively. Stephen nodded. That's why we're training. You'll learn to manage it, and it'll benefit me too. I'll finally have someone to train my martial arts with. Eldritch magic circles formed around Stephen's forearms as he threw a punch toward Asta. Asta's instincts kicked in, and he leapt out of the way, landing on his feet as the boulder he'd been sitting on shattered, sending rocks flying everywhere. That wasn't fair. I wasn't ready. Asta shouted. Stephen glanced at his arm, flexing his hand and studying the magic circles that had enhanced his strength. He flicked his wrist and smirked. Cry about it, he taunted, before flying to Asta. The cloak of levitation billowed behind him as his forearm, encased in 3 glowing magic circles, increased his strength threefold. Thus, Stephen continued to spar with both Asta and during the day, slowly helping Asta get a handle on anti-magic. At night, Stephen trained his time magic, carefully practicing within his grimoire. Though it wasn't his strongest set of spells yet, he was becoming more proficient, but unlike with his other magic, he treated time magic with great care and caution. And then came the day for Magic Night exams. Chapter 12, Strange Magic Night Entrance Exam. Third Person's POV. The day of Magic Night exams. Stephen sat down by Demon Skull, holding a half-eaten apple in his lap. Around his hands, a green magic circle appeared. As Stephen rotated his hand clockwise, more of the apple seemed to disappear, counterclockwise, the eaten part returned until the apple was whole again. Nero, who was perched on his shoulder, softly pecked him. Oh right, I was racing them to see who would get there first, wasn't I? Stephen reached to his side and hooked his finger onto a ring hanging from his belt. For some reason, I'm strangely excited about this. I don't know why, it feels like a new chapter in our lives. Stephen noticed Nero staring at him with a straight expression. He rolled his eyes. I wasn't making a pun. Stephen bit into the apple, holding it in his mouth, and twirled his hand in a circle before him. He began to levitate through the swirling portal and ended up above a group of people. They looked up at him in surprise, while others clicked their tongues, unimpressed by his showmanship. As the portal closed behind him, the wind picked up, and Stephen floated down toward the others. Appeared next, surrounded by a small tornado, before landing in front of Stephen. Cheater. It's only cheating because you lost, Stephen smirked proudly. And to be fair, I gave you and Asta a good 20-minute head start. If you lost with such a handicap, it might be a skill issue, which means it's not my fault. Stephen shrugged as the cloak of levitation, COL, extended toward and began patting his back to comfort him. It doesn't change the fact that you cheated. Are we going to wait for Asta? Is he close? Surprisingly, he's not that far behind, replied, a bit apprehensive. He'll be here in a couple of minutes. A few minutes passed. Stephen finished his apple, and they saw a dust cloud in the distance. Stephen held up 3 fingers, then 2, and finally 1. If I'm not first, I'll at least be second. Stephen underestimated Asta stopped running and collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. I'm dead last. He said, seeing Stephen and waiting for him. Stephen's cloak flew from his body, pretended to crouch down, and patted Asta's back. You're such a good cloak, trying to comfort me, Asta cried. The cloak then flew back to Stephen's body as he looked amused. They all headed inside the giant stadium in the order they had arrived. At the entrance, they had to show their grimoires before receiving a ticket. Stephen cracked the space in front of him, surprising the receptionist, and revealed his 6-leaf Clover grimoire. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head. Why your grimoire? It's... Can I just get my number? Stephen asked in a plain tone. Right, sorry. The receptionist blushed as she handed him number 163. Next was who showed his grimoire. The Four Clovers. She said with awe and respect in her voice, handing him number 164. Then came Asta, who proudly showed her his rusty-looking grimoire. 5. What is going on with this kingdom? She muttered, handing Asta number 165. As Stephen entered, Nero flew away from his shoulder to avoid the appearance of an anti-bird being attracted to him, instead landing on Asta's head. While all the birds kept away from and Stephen, Asta was surrounded from head to toe by a flock, with only his eyes visible. Sighed, while Stephen laughed, wishing he had a camera to capture the moment. Asta ran off, swatting at the birds, until he bumped into a man wearing a white tank top and smoking a cigarette. After a brief exchange, Asta was already being lifted into the air. You wanna die, runt? Ow! Ow! I'm sorry. Suddenly, an eldritch whip flew through the air and wrapped around the man's forearm. I'd appreciate it if you didn't give Asta any more brain damage. He's already quite dumb as it is. Stephen said, holding the whip. Hey! That's just mean. Asta protested, still suspended in the air. The man, Yami, looked at the whip, then yanked his arm, but Stephen stood his ground and raised an eyebrow. You're pretty strong, Stephen said with a smile. I could say the same about you, Grandpa. What did you just call me? Stephen asked, narrowing his eyes. Aside from growing white hair, are you already going deaf, too? Yami released Asta and turned toward Stephen. Yami. Please stop getting into fights with the examinees. A teen with blonde hair said apprehensively. That's Finral Rulacase, a rare spatial magic user. One of the examinees shouted. And that's Yami Sukiro, the Lord of Destruction and captain of one of the magic squads. Captain of the Black Bulls. So, are you going to release me, Gramps? Since you let Asta go, yes I am, Stephen said, undoing the whip. And don't call me that. Thank you for waiting, invited examinees. A voice resounded through the stadium as large birds began to appear. Yami clicked his tongue. Those bastards didn't wait for me. You got lucky, Runt and Gramps, he said, walking away. The crowd soon erupted into cheers, excited to see the Magic Knight captains, shouting out names like the Golden Dawn, Silver Eagles, and Crimson Lion. I will be in charge of this year's exams, the captain of the Golden Dawn announced as the examinees cheered. It's William Van Jans, captain of the Golden Dawn and the next candidate to inherit the title of Wizard King. Someone shouted. Both Asta and narrowed their eyes, seeing him as their competition for the title. Stephen narrowed his eyes for another reason. He's also strong. William pulled out his grimoire. Magic tree, descend. The sky folded in on itself as tree roots extended from the tier in the sky. The roots reached everyone and transformed into brooms. Then, the roots retracted, and the hole in the sky closed. William smirked as he closed his book. Let the Magic Knight entrance exams officially begin. He announced calmly. You will all go through a series of tests, and by the end, we will call you up and decide which magic squad you will join. The first test is to fly those brooms. Stephen ignored the brooms entirely, floating up past everyone. He sat cross-legged in the air, resting his face on his fist. Show off. Said, appearing next to him while standing on his broom. Says the one trying to act all aloof and mysterious, Stephen scoffed in amusement. They were both shocked to see Asta suddenly appear between them. Hey guys! But before he could finish, Asta dropped back down to the ground. He kicked off again, momentarily flying up to join them before falling back down. Pfft! Stephen covered his face, shaking his head in laughter, while managed a small smile, rolling his eyes. Do you guys think Asta started before dropping down again? That this counts? He asked with a wide grin. No, both Stephen and said simultaneously. Test after test, Stephen moved through with little effort. When asked to hit targets, he flicked his wrist, sending precise bolts of mystical energy that struck dead center every time. When it was time to lift heavy objects using magic, he waved his hand, and the objects floated effortlessly into place. While others struggled and strained, Stephen barely broke a sweat, completing each task with a bored look. Where others conjured large, flashy spells, Stephen's subtle hand movements yielded perfect results. He didn't need to summon great storms of magic, he simply performed each task with flawless precision, as if it required no effort. The examiners exchanged glances, but said nothing, watching as Stephen breezed through every challenge with an almost casual ease, making it seem as though the entire process was beneath him. Chapter 13, Strange Choice of Magic Squad. Third Person's POV. After the miscellaneous tests, it was time for the final test of the Magic Knight entrance exams, the one-on-one battles. You. An arrogant noble with blue hair pointed at Stephen. You've been acting all high and mighty ever since you got here, you commoner. I believe it's time someone put you in your place. I challenge you. Stephen didn't care, he simply floated up, his cloak billowing behind him as he took the center of the stage. Begin. William announced. The noble opened his grimoire, surrounded by a fiery aura, and smiled arrogantly. Stephen put his right hand under his left elbow, made devil horns with his fingers, and aimed at his opponent. Arcane magic, bolt of Balthak. His hand, formed into devil horns, grew a ball of blue energy and shot out like a lightning bolt, tearing through the air. It hit his opponent square in the chest, sending him flying backward and smashing into the stadium walls, causing them to crumble. Stephen rotated his hands back in front of him and floated back down, his cloak whipping behind him as he walked toward the wall where Yuno and Asta stood. Stephen then sat in the air between them, pulled out his grimoire, and ignored the looks he was receiving as he read. Yuno shook his head. They never stood a chance, he said as he walked to the center and stood in front of his opponent. As the signal to start was given, Yuno flicked 2 fingers toward his opponent. The wind picked up, and his opponent was sent flying back, smashing into the wall next to Stephen's opponent. Ba-ha! Ba-ha! An arrogant guy with dirty blonde hair leaned down toward Asta and spoke a few interesting words before walking to the front. Asta, kick his ass, Stephen scoffed. Asta huffed as he took the center and smirked smugly. You don't need to tell me that. That's what I was already going to do. Begin. Bronze creation magic, bronze shell blaster. Asta didn't wait for him to finish his spell and pulled out his buster sword from his grimoire. The ground beneath Asta cracked, surprising most of the Magic Knight captains, especially Yami. That was all pure strength. Asta instantly appeared beside the blue magic shell and smashed right through it, hitting his opponent with the flat side of his blade. His opponent was also sent flying back, smashing into the wall and knocked unconscious. All 3 opponents were now unconscious against the wall. Asta slammed his sword down. I'm not here to just join the Magic Knights and have fun without putting in any effort. I'm here to work my butt off and become the Wizard King. Stephen and Yuno looked at each other for a moment before smiling, while some of the magic captains grinned in amusement. After everyone showed off their magic and fought their opponents. And that marks the end of the Magic Knight examinations. When we call your number, please come forward. The squad captains will raise their hands if they want you in their squad. If more than one captain raises their hand, it's up to the examinee to decide. However, if none raise their hand, it means you weren't eligible and will have to try again next year, William explained. Now then. Number 1. Number 15. Number 37. Number 79. Number 121. Number 163. Stephen floated to the front and landed in the middle, looking up at the captains. Soon, every single Magic Knight captain raised their hands and chose him. Everyone's eyes widened in shock, including Asta's, while Yuno simply smiled as he rested by the wall. Unbelievable. All of them. But isn't he just a commoner? He's actually kinda cute. That patch of white hair increases his charm. William Van Jans looked down at Stephen with a smile. It appears to be a unanimous decision. The choice is yours. Which squad do you think suits you best? Stephen looked at all the captains from right to left before stopping at the Golden Dawn and smiling. The rest of the Magic Knight captains sighed in disappointment, while William smiled back at Stephen. I choose the Black Bulls. William's smile faltered, along with everyone else's expression. What? Yami asked, equally surprised, before laughing loudly and pointing at William. Ha 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 ha. You should see the look on your face. You thought it was going to be you. If you don't mind, may I ask your reason? William asked, tilting his head in confusion. Yami stopped laughing and looked at Stephen in confusion. Yeah, Gramps, why the hell would you choose our squad? What's the matter with you? Captain Yami, you're our captain. Please try not to talk bad about us. Finral said awkwardly. Stephen shook his head and sighed. I'm kinda regretting choosing you because of your attitude and name-calling, but it's whatever. Stephen then turned to William. You see, I absolutely love and adore magic. I think it's the greatest thing ever. Everyone was mostly taken aback by the earnestness in his voice and the look in his eyes. And one of the things I love most about magic is freedom, a freedom I don't think I would have with any other magic squad. The Black Bulls are always said to be scoundrels, the lowest of the low. Hey! Watch it, Grandpa, Yami warned. Stephen sighed. That they possess no tact and that every mission ends up with something being destroyed. But I see it differently. I see it as them just having fun and being free. And that's what magic is about. That's why I chose the Black Bulls. The old man is gonna make me blush, Yami said, rubbing the back of his head, a bit embarrassed. Like I said. Already regretting it. Stephen grumbled. No take-backsies. Yami yelled, leaning over his seat and pointing at Stephen. What are you, a child? Stephen yelled back in annoyance. Of course to you, I'm a child, Grandpa. William sighed and shook his head. So he chose the Black Bulls because he loves magic. What kind of reason is that? He muttered. Very well, William nodded. Get up here, Gramps. Yami motioned with a happy smile. Stephen sighed and shook his head. I already hate it. Stephen, using a sling ring, opened a portal and appeared next to Finral and another squad member. Finral looked at him in surprise, along with nearly everyone else. You're a spatial mage. My magic is versatile enough to dabble in a bit of everything, Stephen shrugged, while the others looked at Yami with envy for having two spatial mages. Ha ha ha. Look all you want, he chose me. Yami bragged to the other captains. Another member of the Black Bulls, who appeared to be like a mime, turned towards Stephen and muttered a few words. Stephen nodded and bowed his head slightly. It's nice to meet you too, Gordon. I'm Stephen, and I hope we can get along and be friends as well. You heard him? Finral asked in surprise. Yet. Stephen said, looking at Finral in confusion. While Gordon put his hands together and smiled, happy to be able to communicate with someone. Chapter 14, Strange Meeting with the Black Bulls. Third person's POV. After Stephen was welcomed into the Black Bulls, Nero swooped down gracefully, landing on his shoulder. She rubbed her head affectionately against his cheek as a silent congratulation. Once Stephen's placement was settled, William stepped forward and called the next number, his voice calm and commanding. Number 164. Yuno confidently stepped forward, and, just like before, the captains all raised their hands. The room buzzed with murmurs of shock and awe. Another one. Well, this one makes sense, he holds the 4-leaf Clover grimoire. Yet, but he's a commoner too. This one's kinda cute though. Someone whispered. Yami, grinning, leaned forward with a mischievous gleam in his eye. Let's make it 2 for 2. Come on, kid. Yuno's eyes locked onto William with unwavering determination. I choose the Golden Dawn, he declared, his serious expression leaving no room for doubt. A ripple of disappointment passed through the other captains, their faces reflecting mild frustration. Even Yami grumbled in annoyance. William couldn't help but smile smugly at Yami, almost as if to say, you might have taken the special one with the mysterious grimoire and artifacts, but I've got the 4-leaf Clover by my side. With Yuno's selection confirmed, William called out again, number 165. Asta strutted forward, his chest puffed out, fully expecting the same reaction as Stephen and Yuno. However, the silence was deafening. No hands were raised. Yami leaned back toward Stephen. You seem close to the kid. Tell me, is he worth it? I'm already inclined to agree, but I want to hear your opinion. Stephen's expression turned serious. You'd be a fool not to choose Asta. You can see it, right? He's special. And I'm not saying that just because we grew up together. Yami gave a thoughtful nod, processing Stephen's words. Meanwhile, Asta's heart sank as he clenched his fists, realizing no one was stepping forward. That is, until he heard a familiar voice. All right, I'll take the little runt, Yami said with a grin, raising his hand. Really? Asta shouted in pure joy. He didn't care that Yami had threatened to kill him earlier, he was chosen to be a magic knight. Yami's bluntness didn't waver as he continued, the reason no one else picked you is because you're creepy and weird. No one's heard of a sword that can cut through magic, not to mention you're freakishly strong with that freakish-looking grimoire to boot. No surprise nobody wanted you. Each word felt like a dagger in Asta's chest. He crumpled to the ground, visibly hurt by Yami's brutally honest assessment. But lucky for you, Yami added, crossing his arms, the Black Bulls are all about being freaky and weird. You'll fit right in. Captain Yami, Finral sighed, please, this is your squad you're talking about. Yami ignored him. So, you say you're aiming to be the Wizard King, huh? Well, you better be ready to surpass your limits. Yes, sir. Asta saluted with a massive grin, his enthusiasm undimmed. Just then, a golden circle appeared beneath Asta's feet. Ah! He yelped as the ground opened beneath him, dropping him through a portal. He landed gracefully beside Stephen and behind Yami. Nice to have you aboard, Runt, Yami teased. Asta rubbed the back of his head, grinning sheepishly. With the magic night exams concluded, Yami turned to Finral. Take us back to the base. As Finral activated his spatial magic, Asta and Yuno exchanged one last look, their eyes filled with determination. They smirked before turning forward, each ready to face their future. Their journey had just begun. The portal opened, and in a blink, they found themselves standing in front of the Black Bull's base. Boom! The front door exploded open, revealing pure chaos inside. You ready to get your butt kicked? Not if I kick yours first. Ha ha ha. Yami grinned at the madness. Welcome to the worst Magic Night squad, the Black Bulls. Both Stephen and Asta stared wide-eyed at the bedlam before them. Stephen muttered, blinking slowly, you know, he sighed, watching a woman in her underwear stumble out while rubbing her messy hair, maybe there is such a thing as too much freedom. Ugh, she groaned, I drank too much. Head's killing me. Asta gulped, taking a hesitant step forward. Hello. I'm Asta. It's a pleasure to be a part of your squad. He announced at the top of his lungs. No one was paying attention, as they were all lost in their own worlds. One person was launching fireballs at another, who was dodging them effortlessly, explosions erupting around them. Stephen, turning to leave, sighed and said, I've made a grave mistake coming here. I'm heading home. Later, Asta. You'll fit right in. Before he could make his exit, he felt a firm grip on the back of his cloak and shirt. Yami had grabbed him, preventing his escape. Stephen let out another sigh, slouching slightly as he resigned to his fate. Seeing another explosion, Yami punched a hole in the side of the base. Hey! Stop destroying my base! Instantly, everyone froze and rushed over, shouting, Captain Yami! Welcome back, sir! I see you all love me so much, but enough already. You're annoying, Yami grumbled. Anyway, I picked up a couple of recruits. Say hello. Stephen straightened up, blowing the white patch of his hair out of his eyes. Before he could say anything, a woman approached him, swaying her hips slightly. She was dressed in little more than underwear, her red hair cascading behind her as she tucked a strand behind her ear. Oh wow, Captain, you've caught someone handsome for us, she said, leaning in. The name's Vanessa. What's yours, cutie? Stephen started, the names. Before he could finish, Vanessa abruptly turned to the side and vomited. Wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, she flashed a crooked smile at Stephen. You were saying? Stephen turned to Yami, his expression deadpan. What kind of establishment are you running here where you can't even afford proper clothes for your members? Meanwhile, Asta cheerfully introduced himself again, I'm Asta, from Hage Village. I'm a new member of the Black Bulls. A newcomer, hey. A man with sharp eyes and a threatening air stepped forward. The name's Magna. But you don't get to call yourself a member of the Black Bulls without passing our little baptism. Only then do you earn your robe. Another voice, filled with enthusiasm, interrupted. I call dibs on him. I'm Luck. What's yours? Luck's grin stretched wide, almost unnervingly. Stephen. Same village as Asta. Luck's grin widened further. Well, Stephen, you look strong. Let's try and kill each other. Okay. Stephen shrugged, sensing no malice in Luck's words. Dash. Later, in the courtyard, Stephen and Asta stood on one side, while Magna and Luck stood opposite them. The rest of the Black Bulls gathered around to watch, eager for the upcoming clash. Stephen and Luck locked eyes, neither flinching nor moving, both waiting for the other to make the first strike. "All right then," Stephen muttered. He levitated off the ground, summoning a shimmering shield of eldritch magic over his fist, before shooting toward Luck at incredible speed. Luck's grimoire materialized beside him, pages glowing and flipping rapidly. Lightning crackled around him, forming a gauntlet of electricity with sharp claws over his hands. With a streak of lightning, Luck charged, a wild grin on his face. He thrust his lightning-clad hand forward, aiming straight for Stephen, but Stephen's form dissolved into a flock of dark, shadowy birds, reforming behind Luck. With a swift motion, Stephen fired a bolt of energy from a magic circle at Luck, who dodged it just in time. Stephen, unfazed, flicked his wrist, summoning a magical whip that coiled around Luck's legs. With a sharp tug, he swung Luck around and hurled him toward a tree. Luck twisted in midair, landing on his feet against the tree trunk and launching himself back toward Stephen, claws extended. Stephen turned his magic circle into shields, blocking Luck's assault before driving his knee into Luck's chin, sending him flying backward. Luck grimaced but quickly recovered. He caught a glint of gold, a glowing dagger flying toward him. Reacting instinctively, he grabbed it midair, only for it to explode, sending him crashing hard to the ground with a thud. Groaning, Luck rolled and rose to his feet, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. He smirked, wiping it away. "Let's keep going." He clapped his hands together, forming a ball of crackling lightning between them. Stephen, sensing the surge of power, made a circular motion with his hands, gathering his own energy. The lightning ball in Luck's hands transformed into a massive beam of raw electricity, surging toward Stephen. A large magic circle appeared in front of Stephen, flames swirling within. "Flames of Fulton," he whispered, thrusting the circle forward. A torrent of fiery energy blasted out, meeting Luck's lightning head-on. The clash of fire and lightning created a powerful explosion, sending shockwaves across the courtyard. Stephen conjured a shield to protect himself from the blast, while the others shielded their eyes from the dust and debris. As the smoke cleared, Luck lay groaning on the ground, surrounded by the remnants of fire. He pushed himself up on one elbow, squinting through the haze to see a dark figure approaching. Stephen emerged from the flames, his cape billowing behind him. He extended a hand toward Luck. "I guess that's my win." Luck laughed, wiping the blood from his lip. "Ha ha ha. You sure are fun. Let's try to kill each other again sometime." Stephen grinned, helping him to his feet. "Sure." Meanwhile, a girl with long, silver hair stood atop the wall of the base, watching their exchange with narrowed eyes. "He's strong, strong for a commoner," she muttered, though her fists unconsciously clenched. Chapter 15, Strange Tour. Third Person's POV. After Stephen and Luck's sparring session, a little girl with black hair approached them carrying a picnic basket. "Here's one for you, Luck. And you must be Stephen, right? I'm Charmy. Here, have one, it'll help restore your magic power." Charmy said cheerfully, pulling out a cupcake from her basket. "Thanks," Stephen said as he took a bite. His eyes widened in surprise. "Whoa, these are actually really good." Charmy rubbed the back of her head, a little embarrassed. "Ah, shucks." Stephen glanced over and saw that Asta had already finished his fight, evident from the soot-blackened face of Magna nearby. "Whoa, dude. To be able to keep up with Luck, you must be pretty strong," Magna said, giving Stephen a thumbs up, clearly impressed by his abilities. Magna then pulled out 2 Black Bull's robes and handed them to Stephen and Asta. "The 2 of you earned these, wear them with pride. From now on, you're officially members of the Black Bulls." As Stephen took his robe, he levitated slightly off the ground. A ring of his magic appeared around him, passing over his body as his clothes transformed. His shirt and pants turned black, now emblazoned with the Black Bull's logo on his chest and thigh, while keeping a stylish flair. He floated back to the ground with his hands casually in his pockets, and Vanessa let out a playful whistle. "Talk about fashionable." She then turned to Asta, pointing her wand at his headband, which turned black with the Black Bull's symbol while he donned his new robe. Stephen, puzzled, glanced at Vanessa and asked, "So, why aren't you wearing any clothes? Is this squad really that poor?" "Freedom of choice." Vanessa winked. Stephen shrugged slightly, bowing his head politely. "I see. I will not judge you then. As long as you're happy." Vanessa gave him a playful pat on the back. Aren't you just adorable? How about having a drink with me? If you're not talking about beer, sure. If you are, maybe another time. Vanessa nodded with a grin. I'll hold you to that promise. Before the conversation could continue, Magna hooked his arm around Stephen's neck, dragging him and Asta. Let's go, you newbies. It's time for your senior to show you around the base. As they were hauled through the base, Magna led them into a large dining hall. This is where we eat. Asta's eyes widened in amazement. Whoa! It's huge. That's what she said. Magna added with a cheeky grin. They moved to the next area. And this is the main bath. Magna presented the steaming room. Wow! It's so big too. Asta exclaimed again, brimming with enthusiasm. Magna, not missing a beat, responded, that's also what she said. Magna pointed down a hallway with spikes and chains. That way leads to the girls' rooms. And if a guy tries to go down there, he's met with trap magic. Oft? What? Asta asked, his face frozen in horror. Stephen merely shrugged, adding dryly, I don't even have anything to say to that. And over here is the wild animal room. Magna continued, showing them a heavily barred room with wild beasts. Asta's eyes widened. Why would you even need that? Stephen, however, looked inside thoughtfully. They seem nice. Both Magna and Asta exchanged a look as if Stephen had lost his mind. As they continued the tour, they ran into a girl with bright silver hair and an air of nobility. There you are. Asta, Stephen, meet your other teammate, a newcomer just like you two. Magna said, gesturing toward her. I'm Asta from Hage. Let's get along. Asta said cheerfully, extending his hand. The silver-haired girl slapped his hand away. Don't address me so casually, commoner. I am Noel Silva. Before she could finish, Stephen, unimpressed, began walking away. Why are you walking away? Don't you know it's rude to leave during an introduction, especially when it's royalty talking? Noel called after him. Stephen turned his head slightly, his expression apathetic. It's also rude to treat people the way you're treating them. So, unless you plan to fix your attitude, I couldn't care less about learning your name. Noel's eyes widened in shock, while Asta rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. Sorry about that. Stephen's the type who believes you should treat others the way you want to be treated. Since you were rude, well, he's going to be rude back. Noel's face twisted in indignation. Who does he think he is? I'm royalty. She huffed, summoning a large ball of water in her hand. Let's see how he deals with this. She launched the water spell at Stephen's back. Without turning, Stephen kept walking. The water ball veered off course, splashing harmlessly against the wall. Noel clicked her tongue in frustration. Stephen stood in front of what was supposed to be his room. It was small, filled with cobwebs, and looked more like a cell than living quarters. This will be your room from now on. Enjoy. Luck said, patting Stephen's back before skipping away cheerfully. Stephen cracked his fingers and muttered to himself, this is going to need some serious remodeling. He opened his grimoire, flipping through its pages. You ready? Stephen asked Nero, the small bird perched on his shoulder. Nero chirped in response as Stephen summoned his magic, enveloping the room. A short while later, Stephen stood proudly in front of a completely transformed space. A large bed occupied the center wall, surrounded by shelves filled with books on magic and medicine. To one side stood a wardrobe and cabinet, while on the other, empty shelves awaited artifacts he planned to collect in the future. His cloak of levitation rested on a nearby hanger. Stephen admired his work. You know, Nero, we could make a lot of money if we went into construction, he teased, glancing at the bird, who chirped in agreement. With the room to his satisfaction, Stephen sat down on his newly crafted bed and noted that night had fallen. He decided to head into his grimoire's magical library, his body floating peacefully in meditation as he studied. An hour later, Stephen returned to his body, while Nero settled on one of the pillows, falling asleep. Meanwhile, Stephen, ever the scholar, entered astral projection, continuing his studies in medicine, as one way or another he was going to want that doctor title to his name, even if it was the last thing he ever did. As he read, his focus was interrupted by a series of explosions outside. Confused, he glanced out the window and spotted Noel standing near a tree, attempting to hit a target with her magic but missing spectacularly. Curious, Stephen quietly opened the window and observed, raising an eyebrow at her efforts. It's really early in the morning. Shouldn't she be getting her beauty sleep since she's nobility or whatnot? Stephen saw her train until sweat covered her face and was panting heavily. Maybe there's more to her than meets the eye, Stephen thought, impressed with dedication, as he continued to study her, trying to find out why she kept failing. He then tilted his head in confusion. Why is she expecting to fail every time? Chapter 16, Strange Mentality. Third person's POV. You're going about it the wrong way. Why? Stephen's voice startled Noel so much that she yelled and turned toward him, pointing her wand and firing a ball of water. The spell missed entirely, flying off to the side and hitting a tree. You. How long have you been watching me? Noel demanded. A good half an hour. Stephen shrugged. Stalking royalty is a crime, you know. Noel exclaimed, glaring at him. So, do you want help or not? Stephen asked. Of course I don't need your help. Especially not from a commoner. Noel huffed. Okay, Stephen said, leaning back into his room and closing the window. Noel was taken aback. She stared at the closed window, biting her lip before glancing around at the destruction she had caused. She walked up to his window and saw him sitting on his bed, reading his grimoire. She knocked on the window, and with a flick of his wrist, it opened. Yet? Stephen asked, not bothering to get up or even look away from his book. Weren't you supposed to convince me that I need your help and beg until I reluctantly agreed? She asked, crossing her arms. Stephen looked up at her as if she had lost her mind. And why would I do that? Humph, because I'm royalty, obviously, Noel said arrogantly. Stephen rolled his eyes. I have too much self-respect to play along with your delusions. Delusions? She screeched. Stephen looked at her in confusion. Yet. What else would you call it when someone thinks they deserve the world at their feet just because of their status? I don't expect the world at my feet. You expected me to drop everything, fall to my knees, and prostrate myself just because of our different statuses. If you expect that from me, even though we're squad mates, what do you expect from those who aren't? Stephen raised an eyebrow. I don't want any of that. All I want is respect. Noel snapped. In this world, respect isn't given freely, you have to earn it. You lost mine earlier, got it back, and then lost it again, Stephen replied. Noel looked down at her feet, his words hitting hard. Why would I need the respect of a commoner anyway? Stephen flicked his wrist, and the window closed again. Noel stopped and bit her lip, staring down at the ground in frustration. After a moment, she groaned, walked back to the window, and knocked once more. The window opened again. Yet. What did you mean earlier when you said I was going about it the wrong way? Why should I answer that? What insight could a commoner possibly offer a grand noble of your esteemed status? Stephen teased. Are you going to help me or not? Noel asked, irritated. You need help? I would have never guessed. Stephen replied absent-mindedly, flipping a page in his book. Are you making fun of my training? Noel demanded. Stephen looked up at her with a serious expression, surprising her. I would never make fun of someone's hard work. Noel blushed slightly as Stephen returned to his grimoire. I was making fun of your inability to ask for help. How was I supposed to know you needed it if you never asked? Erg. Noel grunted in annoyance, pacing around and looking at the destruction she had caused. Her shoulders slumped, and she lowered her head in embarrassment and shame. I need your help. Stephen smiled, leaning forward in his window, folding his arms as he looked at her. See? That wasn't so hard. Needing help isn't something to be ashamed of, it means you want to learn and improve. Noel blushed again at his smiling expression. I'm only asking because you offered. Don't get any ideas. Stephen rolled his eyes and jumped out of the window. Whatever helps you sleep at night. So, what was I doing wrong? How do I get my spell to hit the target? What's wrong with me? Noel asked, eager to move things along. Your problem is all in here. Stephen said, pointing to her forehead. It's in my head. Noel tilted her head in confusion. Stephen nodded. Every time you cast a spell, you have this expression on your face like you're expecting to fail. Hey! You see, magic is about bringing what's in our heads into reality. Spells respond strongly to our intent and emotions. Noel nodded, listening intently to his explanation. I don't know what's going on with you, and I'm not going to ask. That's your business. But from where I'm standing, it looks like you see yourself as a failure, Stephen said bluntly. Noel's eyes widened as she looked at Stephen, fear creeping into her expression. Since you think of yourself as a failure, your magic is reacting in kind with your thoughts. Your magic fails because you believe you are going to fail. Once you manage to fix your mentality, you should be able to solve your magic problem. Noel looked at her wand a bit apprehensively. It's responding to my feelings. She took a deep breath and pointed forward toward her target while mentally repeating to herself, I'm not a failure, I'm not going to fail. I'm not a failure, I'm not going to fail. As she fired her water cannon, it shot forward in a straight line before veering off in the opposite direction at the last minute. Noel looked disappointed and dropped her gaze in shame. Maybe I am a failure. Nice work, Stephen said with a smile, subconsciously patting her head, feeling a desire to comfort her as he noticed her expression. What do you mean, nice work? I totally failed, didn't you see? Noel asked, a bit saddened by her attempt. Then you and I see things differently. Where you saw failure, I saw progress. Before, when you fired a spell, it would immediately go flying all over the place and hit whatever stood in its path. But this time? This time, it went in a straight line for a while if you didn't notice. Noel's eyes widened, but this time for a different reason. You're right. She muttered, realizing the improvement. So you see, you can do it. But there are still doubts holding you back toward the end, keeping you from hitting your target. Noel nodded. How do I fix it? That's the hard part about a mental block, it's not something someone else can just fix for you. Eventually, you'll have to confront what's bothering you. But for now, all you can do is learn to live with it. Embrace the fact that you're a failure. Hey! Noel looked at Stephen like he was crazy. Stephen smirked and held up a finger. If you're a failure, that means things can't possibly get any worse. The only direction you can go is up, and you'll start improving so that you're not a failure anymore. That's easier said than done. Noel grumbled. Stephen nodded in agreement. Here, I'll help you with the first step. Face forward toward your target, Stephen ordered. I'm taking orders from a commoner. Noel mumbled, but she complied. She was then taken aback as Stephen held up her chin. What are you doing? She exclaimed, turning red with embarrassment. Stop talking, Stephen said, his expression serious. Wah! Stephen then took her hand holding the wand while keeping her chin up, making her blush even more. Now, I want you to forget about everything. Hey! Noel asked, turning to him in confusion. Face forward, don't look at me, Stephen instructed, guiding her gaze back to the target. Noel continued to blush. I can't believe I'm letting this commoner touch me. Now, see your target, that should be your only focus. Don't think about anything else. Everything else is irrelevant beside your target. Whether it's me, you, your life, your family, your status, it's all irrelevant. Forget everything and let your instincts take over. Stephen whispered. His words were like a devil's whisper. Noel stared at her target, wand pointing toward it. She closed her eyes and followed Stephen's advice. Let your instincts take over, he repeated. Let your mana flow like it's supposed to. Stephen watched as a ball of water began swirling at the tip of her wand. Then let it all go, your insecurities, your fears, your anger, your sadness, even your joy and happiness. Let it all go into this shot. Noel's body was pushed back slightly as she released the spell. She heard the sound of something being hit and slowly opened her eyes. The tree in front of her was gone, and all that remained was an impact where her target once stood. Her eyes widened as she turned to Stephen in shock. I did it! She muttered in disbelief. She was so stunned by her success that she didn't notice how close she and Stephen were at that moment. Stephen backed away slightly. That you did! Congratulations, he said, raising his hands for a high five. Ha ha ha, I actually did it! Noel cheered, subconsciously jumping and high-fiving both of Stephen's hands. Noel then realized what she was doing and blushed heavily before clearing her throat. Standing tall with her hands on her hips, she said, I mean, of course I did it. I'm royalty, after all. It's to be expected. She flicked one of her ponytails back. Stephen just rolled his eyes and sighed in exasperation. Chapter 17, Strange Magical Mishap. Third Person's POV. Feeling a surge of pride, Noel puffed out her chest. She now wanted to try it all by herself. Stand back, she proudly declared, spreading her arms wide. What are you doing? Stephen asked cautiously, narrowing his eyes. Noel pointed her wand in front of her. I'm going to do it by myself now. Stephen was going to warn her about the dangers of overconfidence but decided to let her fail on her own so she could learn from her mistakes. She grabbed her wrist and shouted, "Haa!" As a surge of mana rose from her body, the ball of water grew larger, and she started to feel apprehensive as fear took over. This is too much. I won't be able to control it. She turned toward Stephen for help and saw him face-palming. Before she could say anything, her magic spell backfired, engulfing her in a torrent of water, lifting her off the ground and sending out blasts that destroyed everything they hit. Hearing the commotion and explosions, the black bulls rushed out to see what was happening. What's going on? Yami asked, watching the scene unfold, smoking a cigarette while Stephen rapidly weaved a spell, forming different symbols and rolling them around quickly. She was practicing a spell, got overconfident, and it backfired, Stephen explained as a ball of energy formed in his palm. He sent it flying toward the giant water ball, which was now creating massive whirlpools on its surface. Hoary hosts of Hoggoth. As the spell struck the water, it transformed into beautiful butterflies, causing Noel to fall. Catch her! Stephen ordered. From his open window, his cloak of levitation flew out, tackling Noel and wrapping itself around her as she coughed. The cloak then brought her down, dropping her into Stephen's arms before elegantly flipping back onto his shoulders, clipping itself in place. Are you all right? Stephen asked, raising an eyebrow. Noel finally stopped coughing and blushed heavily as she realized she was being carried like a princess. She blushed even more upon realizing how close they were. She quickly jumped out of his arms and looked down in shame, thinking, they're going to make fun of me. I'm a noble who can't even use her magic properly. That was amazing! Asta exclaimed in awe. Once you master that spell, you'll be unstoppable. Hey! Noel gasped, looking up in surprise. But I totally butchered that spell. How is it amazing? She muttered. Magna clicked her tongue. You magic royal failure. If controlling your magic is a problem, you should have said so. Magna then pointed to his black robe confidently. We're the Black Bulls. A whole group of failures and weirdos. Your little control problem's nothing. Asta gave Noel a big thumbs up. And since Stephen's training you, you'll be a master in no time. The rest of the Black Bulls chimed in with their support. Stephen then conjured an eldritch magic circle with his finger and tapped Noel on the forehead, enveloping her in his magic. It's warm. She muttered, realizing it was drying her off. Just don't get overconfident next time, and take it slow, Stephen said with a smirk. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Noel said earnestly. After Noel's little episode, they found themselves in the dining hall, eating breakfast. So, what does a magic knight really do? Asta asked, his mouth full of food. You moron. It's only the manliest job in the world. We guard stuff, and people. Plus, we do missions for the kingdom. Magna exclaimed proudly. As this exchange went on, Stephen was levitating some food into his mouth with eldritch magic while reading his grimoire at the same time. Vanessa leaned on the table, her cheeks flushed as she drank from a bottle. So, what's your deal? Why are you reading at a time like this? She asked with a hazy look. My magic relies on the fact that knowledge is power. The more I study and learn, the stronger I become, Stephen explained. I see, so you're the studious type, huh? Scholars are cute too, she said flirtatiously. I never did get everyone's name here. What are they? Asta asked, looking around. Magna began introducing everyone. See the guy staring and getting a nosebleed at that picture? That's Gauche Adley. The guy who fought Stephen yesterday is Luc Voltia. The drunk exhibitionist over there is Vanessa Enoteca. I'm not an exhibitionist. It's a freedom of choice. Vanessa exclaimed drunkenly. That's the difference? Stephen asked in confusion. The difference is that I don't get sexual gratification from this, Vanessa said proudly. Magna muttered before continuing. The big guy with smoke coming out of his mouth is grey. Gray grabbed his grimoire and transformed into Stephen, causing Stephen to scoff in amusement. He snapped his fingers, using the image of icon to turn into Gray. Touché, the fake Stephen said before transforming back, and Stephen followed suit. Charmy then appeared, accompanied by large sheep wearing chef hats, bringing in more food. That's Charmy Papitson. And you've already met Gordon and Finral at the exam, Magna said as he finished the introductions. Stephen set up a small place for Nero and gave her some food. So, who's the fat little bird? You seem to care for her, Magna asked, intrigued by Stephen's actions. Nero took off flying and began pecking at Magna as he tried to escape from her. Get off me, you fat little bird! He shouted. That's Nero, and she doesn't like being called fat. She's pleasantly plump, Stephen said teasingly. Nero turned and glared at Stephen before flying away from Magna. She's kinda cute, Noel said with a small smirk, running her finger along Nero's cheek. After they finished breakfast, Magna took Asta, Noel, and Stephen outside. He stood in front of them with his arms crossed and a large grin on his face. As your senior, I'm going to give you newbies your first mission, Magna declared proudly. You're going to the village of Saucy to hunt boars. They all stared at Magna, wondering if they had heard him correctly. That sounds like such a boring mission, Asta complained. I'm with Asta on this does sound boring. And not really a job for all four of us. Stephen sighed. Noel crossed her arms. I'm nobility. Why should I bother with a filthy boar? It doesn't matter what you think. Here, seniority rules. And as your senior, I say we're all going boar hunting. But why? Asta asked, confused. Magna smirked and said, the captain and I lost a bet the other day while trying to earn some quick bucks. We promised the old man we bet against that we'd do a favor for him, whatever he asked. That doesn't sound like our problem, Asta protested. He's right, Noel shouted in agreement. Anyway, since this is our first mission, I'm actually pretty psyched, Asta said, marching ahead excitedly. Can't believe I'm going to a grimy village to get some grimy boar for some grimy old man. Noel grumbled as she followed Asta. You got a problem with that? Magna asked. Noel blushed slightly and muttered, I was just wondering if it's okay for me to come along since I can't control my magic. Seeing her expression, Stephen patted her head again. Don't worry about that. I'll keep an eye on you and make sure nothing bad happens. Besides, they say experience is the best teacher. You'll learn to control your magic and spells while gaining confidence as you go on missions. Don't touch royalty so casually, Noel muttered, blushing as she moved away from Stephen's hand. Chapter 18, Strange First Mission, 1. Third Person's POV. What Stephen said. Your squad members will have your back, so mess up as many times as you need, Magna said, giving Noel a thumbs up. Magna then looked toward Stephen. Hey, you know spatial magic. Do you think you could teleport us to Saucy Village? I'd need a clear picture of the place to teleport there. Since I haven't been, I can't. Sorry. Stephen shrugged. Magna's shoulders slumped. I should have known. Finral is the same. I guess we'll just have to take our brooms. Except I can't use a broom. I don't have magic, Asta said, raising his hands. Neither can I, since I can't control mine, Noel said, also raising her hand. Magna facepalmed and looked toward Stephen. What about you? I don't use a broom. I use my cloak. And it gets jealous when I use something else to fly with. I guess that's all right, Magna said, shaking his head. What do you mean it gets jealous? Noel asked, giving Stephen a weird look, then glancing at his cloak. Is that thing sentient? The cloak flew off Stephen's shoulders, waved at Noel, and returned to him. You weren't controlling it? Noel asked in surprise. Nope. Enough about Stephen's magical cloak. I'll show you guys something even cooler, Magna said confidently. I mean no offense, but I seriously doubt that, Stephen said with a serious expression. Magna confidently walked toward a shed, opening it extravagantly before pulling out a punk-style broomstick with a calavera design on the front and handle. Ta-da! Magna said, doing jazz hands toward it. So cool! Asta exclaimed. Noel stood with a serious expression, while Stephen's cloak flew off his shoulders and slapped Magna roughly across the back. Ack! What the hell was that for? Magna glared at the floating cloak, which appeared to huff and cross its arms. It's mad at you for comparing it to something so ugly, obviously, Noel scoffed. And honestly, I don't blame it. I'd be offended too if I were compared to that. The cloak flew toward Noel and nodded in agreement. Oi! Don't disrespect Crazy Cyclone like that. Seeing as Asta finds her cool, it's just a difference in taste between male and female. No, it's not. I find it weird, Steven said as the cloak returned to his shoulders. Then you don't know anything about taste. She's one of a kind. Anyway, those who can't fly, get on her. Magna said, hopping onto his broom. Asta happily climbed on, holding onto Magna's shoulders. Yeah! Asta cheered, pointing forward. Yeah, I'm not getting on that thing. I have an image to uphold, Noel scoffed. Ah! She yelped as she was suddenly picked up. She instinctively grabbed onto the nearest thing, wrapping her arms around Steven's neck. What are you doing? Noel demanded, turning into a blushing mess. It's either that thing Steven started. That thing has a name, you know. Magna declared. Or I carry you. You choose, Steven continued. Noel looked between Crazy Cyclone and Steven's face, blushing. She shrank closer into his embrace. This isn't so bad. There's nothing wrong with being carried, she muttered, embarrassed. Steven looked at her in amusement as he began to levitate off the ground. Alrighty then, let's go! Magna shouted, blasting off, leaving a trail of flames and smoke. Steven flew not far behind, his cloak fluttering in the wind. Noel had to turn toward Steven's chest to protect her eyes from the strong air. This is so embarrassing. She thought, a small blush coloring her ears. I'm royalty. I shouldn't be going through this embarrassment. However, Noel couldn't help but close her eyes fully, basking in Steven's warmth and scent. He's warm, just like his magic. And he doesn't smell bad at all. He actually smells really nice. At least for a commoner. Nero, perched on Steven's shoulder, gave Noel a look before glancing at Steven with narrowed eyes. Steven, seeing her expression, rolled his eyes in exasperation. They soon found themselves at a crossroads, one path leading to the village they were supposed to visit. What is this? Magna muttered, his expression growing serious. Steven floated down, a similar seriousness on his face, and set Noel down. Though she would never admit it, Noel was reluctant to let go. The entire village is covered in mist. She whispered, her eyes fixed on the thick fog obscuring the village ahead. Asta, cut it down, Steven ordered. The mist is magical. Asta nodded, suspicion creeping into his expression. He summoned his grimoire and dashed toward the village entrance. He's fast. Noel muttered, impressed by Asta's physical prowess. Asta swung his sword forward, cutting through the mist with rapid strikes until, with a powerful final swing, it dispersed completely. What lay before them was shocking huge icicles suspended in the sky, all aimed downward at the terrified villagers huddled together in the village center. Commence execution, a cold voice echoed through the air. Before anyone could react, Magna charged forward, launching multiple fireballs at the icicles, causing them to explode in fiery bursts. Fire magic, explosive scattershots. As the flames cleared, only Magna remained in the center, sweat dripping from his brow as snowflakes gently fell around him. It's the Magic Knights. They've come to save us. The villagers cried out in relief. What the hell is going on here? Magna shouted, his anger rising. Grandpa! Your prayers have been answered. A little boy sobbed, drawing their attention. They turned to see the boy crying over an old man lying on the ground, blood pouring from a wound in his stomach. He was unresponsive. Noel and Asta's eyes widened in horror, while Magna rushed to the old man's side. Old man! He cried, recognizing him as the one he'd made a bet with alongside Yami. Steven stepped forward, crouching beside Magna and placing a hand on his shoulder. Leave him to me. I'll treat the wound. You know healing magic? Magna asked, his expression intense. I've been training, Steven replied simply. He rolled up his sleeves and, with quick, precise hand movements, conjured an orange sewing needle and thread using his eldritch magic. As Steven worked, Magna stood up, fury building. He glared at the man responsible for the attack, a white-haired figure with slanted eyes, casually sitting on a wooden box and checking his watch. Behind him, several men in white hoods stood silently, awaiting orders. Was this you? Magna demanded, his voice thick with rage. The man ignored him, still focused on his watch. How dare you throw me off schedule? In 3 seconds, all of you will die. He raised his hand as his grimoire appeared, and a massive glacier of ice materialized before him, launching toward the group. Before Magna could react, Asta surged forward, cutting the glacier into pieces with rapid swings of his sword. A dark line appeared across Asta's face as his eyes glowed red, glaring at the man with fury. Why would you do something so terrible? Who the hell are you guys? Asta shouted, his voice filled with anger. The hooded figures behind the man murmured among themselves. We didn't hear about the magic knights being dispatched. Are they on an official mission? How did they break through the mist barrier? The man with the watch glanced at it once more, his expression calm. The Black Bulls, crude heretics who don't fit with the rest of the magic knights. 5 minutes. The worthless villagers knew nothing. We'll finish them off quickly, then hunt what we seek. Chapter 19, Strange First Mission, 2. Third Person's POV. This village is in the Forsaken Realm, the last of the realms between the Common Realm and the Noble Realm. The Forsaken Realm is where all the commoners and inferior breeds inhabit the land. The only magic they can use is pitiful, everyday use magic. They're like animals, unable to use tools. These dumb beasts could rob me of my time. I was simply trying to clear them away earlier. You have enough magic to join the Magic Knights, don't you? You're only trying to save them because it's your mission. Don't they look like pathetic animals to you, even now? The man with the watch said, looking at them apathetically. Those people are the ones I need to protect. Asta declared, gripping his sword tightly. Very well, then. The man glanced at his watch. Die together with these beasts. At his words, he extended his hands, surrounding the entire area with sharp icicles, while one of the hooded men extended his hands and released a powerful mist, the same one that had been obscuring the village earlier. Noel, watch my back, would you? Stephen said, ignoring everything around him as he focused on the old man's wounds. Noel stopped herself and looked at Stephen. She saw him commanding the sewing needle with a finger, carefully stitching the old man's wounds with concentration. A little girl then walked up and grabbed Noel's hand, tears in her eyes. Please help us, Magic Knight. Noel's eyes widened slightly. They're all depending on me. I can't let them down. Her grimoire responded to her emotions. It glowed brightly as an empty page began to fill with words. She crouched down and touched the ground, and mana began forming a dome around them. As royalty and a member of the Black Bulls, I won't let you down. Water creation magic, Sea Dragon's Lair. A dome of water with swirling whirlpools formed protectively over them as icicles rained down. The ground beneath Asta splintered slightly as he cut and deflected the spells back at their enemies with the flat side of his blade. Magna kept rapidly throwing fireballs, creating explosions in the sky. As Stephen sewed the last stitch on the old man, he slowly closed his fist. A sizzling sound was heard, and smoke rose from the wound, causing the old man to grunt in pain from the burning sensation. Grandpa! His grandson shouted in worry. That should stop the bleeding, Stephen muttered, but he's still lost a lot of blood. Noel turned back, saw the burn mark in the shape of stitches on the old man, and then looked towards Stephen as he began floating upward. I'll have to finish this soon, Stephen said as Tal mandalas formed by his fists. He made a small swiping gesture to the side, and the water dome opened a small door for him to exit. As he floated out, the dome closed itself behind him. He so casually interfered with my spell, without even damaging its integrity, Noel thought in surprise. Some of the icicles changed direction midair, aiming toward Stephen, but he enlarged his Tal mandala to block the attack. It then shrank back to fit his fist once more. Stephen began performing rapid hand signs. Asta, Magna, can I leave the hooded man to you while I deal with the leader? Noel will protect the civilians. Leave it to us. Magna said with a large grin, forming fireballs in both hands. It'll be over and done with. Asta said, holding his swords on his shoulders. Stephen floated in the middle of them, then thrust his hand to the side. The flames of Fulton. A blue flame enveloped Stephen's hand just as a massive icicle glacier erupted from the ground, hurtling toward him. Both Magna and Asta took that as their signal and charged in opposite directions toward their opponents. Stephen's cloak wrapped around him, swiftly moving him out of harm's way before unwrapping. With a wave of his hand, Stephen sent forth a blaze of blue fire toward his main opponent. The man waved his hand, summoning a wall of icicle spikes that quickly melted under the intense heat of Stephen's spell, leaving him scrambling in horror. He made a desperate swiping motion, turning the ground beneath him into ice and sliding out of the way. Stephen poured more mana into his spell, intensifying it. As he landed beside his opponent, he made an upward motion, creating a ring of blue fire around them, isolating them from the ongoing battle. His opponent scoffed. "Do you think isolating us was a smart move? Now your friends can't help you. You're stuck in here with me." He spread his arms, summoning more icicles that shot toward Stephen. With a casual wave of his hand, Stephen's flames melted the ice into water, causing his opponent to click his tongue in frustration. Stephen smirked, noticing his opponent step back as he advanced. More ice spells came flying toward him, but Stephen effortlessly flicked them away, his flames reducing each one to nothing. Stephen was walking slowly inside the ring of fire that surrounded them. His cloak billowed behind him with every step he took and waves he made with his hand. His black, obsidian eyes turned blue, matching the color of the spell he used. Now face to face with his opponent, Heath Grice, Stephen stood tall. Heath, unable to retreat any further, felt the smothering heat radiating from the flames, their power overwhelming him. "Who did you say was stuck in here with whom?" Stephen teased. "You're the one stuck in here with me," Heath declared, conjuring an ice sword and thrusting it toward Stephen with a grin. But as the sword neared, it simply melted, turning into water that dripped to the ground. Heath looked down in shock and saw Stephen's hand raised before him. Each time the sword approached, it disintegrated. Heath looked back at Stephen in surprise, who stared at him with an unimpressed expression. "I dislike you. You see magic as nothing more than a tool to wield a weapon to reap lives and make others suffer. Magic is supposed to improve lives, not make them worse. I will not stand here and be lectured by a child." Heath spat coldly, swinging a fist toward Stephen. Stephen leaned back, easily dodging the punch. "I wasn't lecturing you. I was telling you why I'm going to burn you now. And it's simply because I don't like you," Stephen said with a smile as he grabbed Heath's face. "Ah! It burns! It burns! Ah!" Heath screamed in agony as Stephen's flames seared into his skin. After a moment, Stephen unsummoned his flames and backhanded Heath, rendering him unconscious. A large burn in the shape of Stephen's palm was imprinted on Heath's face, now disfigured, with steam and smoke rising from his flesh. Parts of his skin had melted off, leaving a gruesome scar as he lay motionless on the ground. Chapter 20, Strange First Mission, 3. Third Person's POV. Asta rushed toward the hooded men with a burst of speed. One of the hooded men tried to counter Asta by hurling his mist magic at him. But Asta simply cut right through it with his sword before slashing at the man's body, wounding him greatly and moving on to his next target. Any and all magic thrown at Asta either ended up being reflected back at the attackers with the flat side of his sword or cut down, rendering them ineffective. Meanwhile, Magna was rapidly throwing fireballs that exploded on impact. The hooded men, who also wielded ice magic, sent a volley of icicles toward him. However, they were too much for Magna, who was running low on magic and couldn't keep up. "Damn it!" Magna inwardly exclaimed, shutting his eyes. But when he didn't feel any pain, he opened his eyes to find himself surrounded by a small water dome. He grinned and gave a thumbs up to Noel. "Good work, Ms. Royalty." Noel scoffed, though inwardly, she was cheering, "I did it. I really did it. I controlled my magic." Asta, meanwhile, was like a hurricane, taking down everything in his path. Suddenly, they all heard screaming from inside the ring of fire created by Stephen. Inside, they saw Stephen holding Heath up by the face before dropping him. He unsummoned the fire from his hands and backhanded Heath with a closed fist, knocking him unconscious. With a snap of Stephen's fingers, the ring of fire disappeared. "I guess we should start rounding everyone up." They all agreed. Noel then asked, "So, can I let go of my spell?" Stephen nodded, causing Noel to let out a sigh of relief. However, as she released her spell, all the water she was holding over her head dropped on top of her and the nearby villagers. PHTTT. Stephen covered his mouth, trying to stifle his laughter, seeing Noel drenched from head to toe with a straight expression as she moved her hair from her face. "It's not funny," Noel said, glaring at Stephen. Stephen smirked and pinched his fingers together. "It's a little funny. I'll take care of binding everyone, Magna said with a grin as his grimoire floated beside him. Fire binding magic, flame bondage formation, he said. However, before his magic could take effect, water sprouted from the back of one of the hooded mages on the ground. Water magic, torrential transport. The mage, huffing from the pain of his wound, was being carried away by a fast stream of water. Shit! Magna cursed. He's getting away. Stephen calmly extended his arm, conjuring a whip from his hand. The whip shot out and wrapped itself around the escapee's leg. With a strong yank, he pulled the mage back from his spell. Stephen shook his head and clicked his tongue. Tisk, tisk, tisk. No one said you could leave yet. Damn it! The hooded mage grunted. With a flick of his wrist, Stephen shot a small energy bolt from his eldritch magic toward the man's head, slamming it against the floor and knocking him unconscious. Now you can tie them up. Magna smiled widely as his grimoire glowed, and a fireball appeared in his hand. Dash! Once Magna finished tying everyone up, the villagers surrounded them, tears in their eyes as they expressed their gratitude. Just then, Nero appeared, flying through the air with a rock in her beak. She landed on Stephen's shoulder and showed him the rock before spitting it into his hand. Why the sudden interest in rock collecting? Do you want it for your nest or something? Stephen asked teasingly. One of the villagers, noticing the stone in Stephen's hand, smiled at him. If you want that rock, you can have it. It was the village chief's protective charm. You're our savior, after all. Stephen looked at Nero and saw her nodding her head. Smiling, he turned to the villagers. Then I shall graciously take it. Thank you. Noel looked at Stephen as he smiled kindly at the villagers. Realizing she had been staring too long, she quickly shook her head and walked over to grab Nero from his shoulder. You're just too adorable. Noel said, holding onto Nero. Nero, with her usual deadpan expression, didn't bother flying away and let Noel hold her. Yo! Stephen, the scumbag is waking up. Magna said as he noticed Heath slowly opening his eyes. Stephen crouched down slightly toward Heath and teased, Congratulations, you've gained a face only a mother could love. Magna pointed at Heath with an angered expression. I'm gonna rest up a bit more and recover my magic. When I'm done, I'm handing you in. You're going to pay for what you tried to do to these people. Meanwhile, Heath realized his magic had been sealed. Stephen glanced at Magna. Actually, there's no need to wait. I can open a portal back to the base. Oh, that's right. I forgot you could do that. Magna said, happily turning back to Heath, his expression hardening once more. The magic knights are going to make you talk who you are, what you wanted, everything. Heath looked at them with an apathetic expression and coldly said, No, you won't. Suddenly, a glow appeared in Heath's stomach, causing all of their eyes to widen. They were too stunned to react as Heath coughed up blood. Ice magic, ice burial. A blast of ice engulfed them all before it cracked and shattered into multiple pieces, leaving them horrified. A magic item. He self-destructed, Magna muttered in anger. Asta gritted his teeth. Those idiots. Life. What do you think life is? Damn it. Stephen muttered before closing his eyes. Back away, he ordered, stepping in front of them. Asta, have your sword ready, Stephen instructed, crossing his arms as a green magic circle began to form on each forearm. What are you going to do? Noel asked slowly. Just watch. Stephen replied, closing his eyes and pinching his fingers together. He held one hand close to his chest and raised the other above him, spinning it counterclockwise. A green magic circle began forming at the same time, adorned with symbols and runes in place of numbers, with the clock hand in the center. Stephen moved his raised hand toward the shattered icicles and thrust the other hand forward, causing a green magic symbol to appear at his fingertips. Reverse, rewind, undo, Stephen muttered, rotating his hands counterclockwise. Time magic, time reversal. Under the magic circle, the shattered ice began to slowly piece itself back together, undoing the damage as the clock hands in the magic circle moved backward. The ice withdrew itself back into Heath's stomach until the glow dimmed and disappeared. Stephen clenched his fist, stopping the clock's movement. Now, Asta, hit him hard in the stomach. As Stephen ended the spell, Asta rushed forward with his sword and slammed its flat side into Heath's stomach. Heath's eyes widened, his cheeks puffed, and he vomited up an ice-like crystal. Without hesitation, Asta plunged his sword into it, shattering it. Meanwhile, Magna and Noel stood with their mouths agape, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Stephen. Magna began slowly. I mean this in the kindest way possible. Who the hell are you?
Thanks for listening.